This work is revered by countless people as the pinnacle of violent aesthetics. At its peak, its popularity even rivaled that of Hellsing. From maids hiding grenades under their skirts to yachts soaring through the sky to blow up helicopters, every bullet fired sent the audience's adrenaline surging. And it all began with an ordinary office worker, Rock. Despite graduating from a prestigious university, he could only land a meager 3,000 monthly salary job, enduring daily workplace bullying without resistance. Yet, he still clung to hope, until a brutal punch to the face shattered his illusions. While escorting company cargo, he was ambushed by pirates. Not only was the shipment stolen, but he was also taken hostage by the pirate Revy. The black man named Dutch informed their client, Balalaika, that the prey had been captured, and delivery would proceed as scheduled. Meanwhile, at Asahi Heavy Industrial, Kageyama briefed the shareholders that the disc had been seized during transport. Soon after, Bougainvillea Trade Company extended a negotiation offer, but their true identity was that of the Russian mafia, seeking to muscle in on their illegal operations. The disc contained the company's biggest scandal since its founding. However, new intel soon arrived. The Russian mafia hadn't received the disc. It was still in the hands of the pirates who attacked the transport ship. Seeing an opportunity to cut the mafia out, the board entrusted Kageyama with full authority over the matter. On the other side, Dutch disapproved of Revy dragging an innocent civilian into their affairs, but Revy believed they could extract more than just the usual fee. Benny warned that her plan was reckless. They didn't even know the contact person or the ransom account. Enraged, Revy fired several shots at Rock and threatened to throw him overboard. Dutch quickly intervened, pulling the terrified Rock to the deck for air, promising to find a way to contact Rock's company, but only after delivering the cargo to their employer first. After all, they were just middlemen profiting from the deal. Perhaps due to Stockholm Syndrome, Rock even began trusting his kidnappers. Meanwhile, the boss of Asahi Heavy Industrial only learned during the operation that their employee had also been captured. However, Kageyama had already contacted the mercenary group EO Company, and Rock was naturally abandoned by them. On the other side, Dutch took Rock to a bar on the island for drinks. Originally run by remnants of the South Vietnamese army, the place had unintentionally become a den for outlaws while sheltering deserters. Naturally, an ordinary man like Rock couldn't adapt to such an environment. Each member of the pirate trio had their own story. Dutch was an eccentric veteran of countless battles. Benny had once angered both the mafia and the FBI during college and was about to be assassinated when he met Revy. Revy filled her glass and challenged Rock to a drinking contest, taunting him until he downed his drink in one go. After all, Japanese drinking culture was not to be underestimated. Just then, Dutch got through to their employer, who revealed they had captured an Asahi Heavy Industrial spy and extracted intel about EO Company's movements. As the bar patrons watched Rock and Revy's drinking contest, several grenades rolled in. When Rock came to his senses, he found the bar in complete devastation. Crouching under a table to evade the hail of bullets, he realized nearly everyone present had been killed. Crawling desperately for cover, he spotted Revy still casually drinking at the counter. Rock was utterly shattered, convinced he'd be shot dead today. Revy told him to stop screaming and just enjoy life. Then enemy soldiers moved in to check for survivors, at which moment Revy suddenly vaulted over the counter, wielding a customized Beretta M92 to open fire on the attackers, swiftly eliminating most of them. Meanwhile, Benny had already slipped away to prepare their escape vehicle. Knowing staying meant certain death, Rock had no choice but to flee with them. Their next destination was the harbor to meet their employer Balalaika. Benny was attempting to contact Rock's company. If negotiations failed, Rock would be left to die. Rock angrily accused them of dragging him around only to abandon him now, prompting Revy to angrily point her gun at him. Fortunately, the call connected with Kageyama himself, who surprisingly didn't blame Rock for losing the disc, because it no longer existed. It was then Rock learned the disc contained plans for the company's secret nuclear weapons development assistance to a certain nation, an absolutely unforgivable leak. For all company employees' safety, Rock had to perish at sea. They'd even give him a grand funeral. Upon hearing this, Rock rushed to the deck and vomited violently. At that moment, an armed helicopter came flying toward them, led by none other than Captain, who had attacked them in the bar. Revy tossed Rock a rifle while she grabbed the ship's Barrett and fired at the helicopter. Without hesitation, Rock put on a life jacket and tried to flee, only for Revy to wrestle him to the ground, berating him for being a cowardly deserter. Watching from above, Captain decided to take his time playing with them. Rock could no longer stand being pushed around by everyone. He picked up the rifle and hurled it at the helicopter, only to be met with a barrage of gunfire. Revy furiously scolded him for wasting a weapon, leaving Rock in a helpless rage on the deck. His life was nothing more than collateral for a single disc. After one round of attacks, the helicopter suddenly went quiet. Both Dutch and Benny sensed something was wrong. Their enemy had the firepower to sink them instantly, yet they were just trailing behind. Checking the map, Dutch realized their opponent's plan. Ahead lay only jagged reefs and mangroves, narrowing their path until evasion became impossible. Worse, the enemy would prevent any deviation from the course. With no other choice, they plunged into the dense mangrove area. Captain waited near the wreckage, expecting them to turn back. Soon, they'd hit a dead end, and their only escape would require retracing their path. But in the tight waterways, they'd be riddled with bullets. Their ship was already battered. Though miraculously, the onboard torpedoes remained intact, one hit would have blown them sky high. Then, Rock stepped forward with a bold idea. Dutch thought he'd lost his mind. Their firepower was laughably outmatched. But Rock smirked and laid out his plan. Dutch immediately dismissed it as impossible, yet it was their only shot. Rock was betting on their enemy's sadistic mindset, whether they'd truly dare face them head-on, given how the chase had been nothing but a cat-and-mouse game. With no better options, Dutch agreed to gamble on Rock's desperate scheme. Soon, the helicopter's radar detected the ship's movement as it charged at full speed toward the aircraft. Rock stood at the prow, raising a flare gun high, ready to fire in the opposite direction the moment missiles locked on. Revy aimed the Barrett at the helicopter and opened fire, prompting it to retaliate with missile launches. Rock immediately fired a flare into the sky, intercepting the infrared-guided missile. He and Revy then quickly retreated into the cabin and steered toward the sunken wreck. Captain assumed they were using it as a shield, only for the ship to suddenly use the wreck as a ramp, launching into the air. 2 torpedoes shot straight toward the helicopter. With the plan successful, Rock triumphantly flipped the bird before being knocked unconscious by the violent impact of the ship crashing back into the water. Though the vessel was severely damaged, everyone survived unharmed. Once the adrenaline-fueled rush faded, Rock found himself lost in uncertainty again. The disc was ultimately delivered to Balalaika. With Kageyama already present, the two had further business to discuss. Rock refused to leave with Kageyama, especially since the man had already declared him dead. Balalaika, impressed by Rock, offered him sanctuary should he ever face danger. In the end, Rock joined Dutch's pirate crew, Black Lagoon, having earned their respect through previous battles. After negotiating terms with Balalaika, Kageyama retrieved the disc and salvaged his company's reputation. He was a skilled politician and employee, but a terrible husband and father, treating his family with cold indifference even at home. Meanwhile, the newly minted pirate Rock was already raiding naval ships at sea. Even pirates adhered to a courtesy before force approach. Rock played the diplomat while Revy, shouldering her rocket launcher, embodied the threat. After seizing their spoils, they'd return to port for drinks. Such was the life of a pirate. The harbor of vice, Rowanapur. At the harbor's entrance stands a Buddha statue that should have shone brightly, now standing in wretched form upon the sea. Entering by land, one finds a noose hanging at the gateway, prepared for whom, no one knows. Rock, who should have been an office worker in Tokyo, now dances with scoundrels in this city. He bought fruits from an old man who appeared pitiful, only to find them disgustingly bitter. This is a gathering place for international criminals, where survival means deceiving one another. By a public phone booth, Dutch demanded $120,000 from his contact, just as Chen pulled up in his car. Furious about Dutch's dealings with the Russians, Chen spat that business had worsened since that woman's arrival. All profitable trades were snatched by the Russians, who now eyed maritime commerce. Chen urged Dutch to cut ties, but Dutch wouldn't hear it. Even criminals have codes. They had helped Chen in a deal, only for his goods to turn defective before he vanished, leaving them the mess. At least Balalaika understood honorable investments better. Chen warned they'd regret this. This is literally a filthy city, crawling with criminals lurking in shadows. Rock, asleep on a couch, was abruptly kicked awake. They had taken Donnie Yen's job to retrieve Vietnamese military loot on Phu Quoc Island. Revy complained about Rock refusing to wear her Hawaiian shirt, clinging stubbornly to his salaryman outfit. Their car sped toward the pier, unaware this job was Chen's trap. Revy scoffed at Rock's clumsy knot tying once more. Formerly from Asahi Heavy Industrial's supply division, Rock's life had been writing reports and entertaining clients. Homelessness loomed unless he endured it all. When Rock asked about Revy's past, she shut him down cold. Suddenly, Benny detected multiple vessels approaching. No civilian ships would appear in these pirate-infested waters. Assuming it was Border Patrol reconnaissance ships, Benny immediately sounded the red alert. 6 ships pursued them in an encircling formation, clearly a premeditated ambush. Dutch had no choice but to push their vessel to maximum speed. After observing, Revy concluded their pursuers weren't Coast Guard but reckless pirates. When Rock questioned Dutch about their client's background, Dutch admitted he hadn't checked. Then came an incoming transmission. Chen, in exchange for regional toll rights, had persuaded the struggling Luwak to hunt down Black Lagoon. Soon surrounded, Dutch abruptly decelerated, causing the flanking ships to unleash full firepower. 2 vessels sank effortlessly. The remaining 4 were Revy's turn. Armed with an M79 grenade launcher, Revy obliterated the nearest ship before switching to a PM-63 machine pistol, raking the others with gunfire. Thick smoke from the barrage obscured visibility, preventing reinforcements. Seizing the moment, Revy boarded the 3rd ship and dominated in close combat, emerging unscathed after single-handedly sinking 3 vessels. With 5 ships destroyed, Luwak panicked, grabbing the wheel to flee. But from the moment he attacked, he was doomed to become Black Lagoon's prey. Revy fired a 40mm grenade, annihilating Luwak's fleet. Rock was stunned. She'd wiped out an entire armada alone. Though uncertain what forged Revy into this, he still trusted her demonic efficiency. Upon learning of Luwak's failure, Chen frantically prepared to abscond with the money. However, before he could act, Balalaika cornered him in his home.
Listen carefully, you piece of horseshit. Pray, that's about the only thing you can still do while you're alive.
Dutch, having made a wasted trip, received a call from Balalaika. As compensation, she invited him to enjoy the beautiful sound of an explosion. She had tied Chen up in the room and blown him to bits. Moreover, they would have more collaborations in the future. In high spirits, Dutch decided to treat his crew to drinks. After Germany's defeat in 1945, a group of German and Japanese officers seized the opportunity to escape by submarine. They spotted an Allied transport ship in the Indian Ocean. The captain intended to attack it, but the lieutenant colonel strongly opposed. There was no need to take such a risk. However, the transport ship carried strategic supplies meant to strike their allies. The lieutenant colonel argued that attacking it would be meaningless, as their nation no longer had a future. This stunned the captain. Yet, even if futile, the battle was unavoidable. The submarine reached the waters of the Indonesian archipelago, only to be surrounded and suppressed by enemy forces. Eventually struck by depth charges, it ran aground. Water flooded the torpedo tubes, causing uncontrollable pressure. Though the flooding was contained to the torpedo room, the submarine was left irreparably crippled. With only 2 hours of air remaining, the Japanese officer chose to commit seppuku. Realizing all was lost, the captain discharged his crew, allowing them to choose their own way to die. Upon learning the submarine would never resurface, the lieutenant colonel broke down. The painting of Brunhilde guiding the 12 knights in his possession was the only artwork the president had created after seizing power. Their mission was to hide it, preserving it as a beacon to rally scattered comrades when they rose again. The captain understood this war's defeat was inevitable, but the next war would continue. He asked if the lieutenant colonel had family, only to be told that family meant nothing in the face of duty. The captain had once fought proudly for his homeland and faced death without regret, but his only resentment was sharing a coffin with a man who cared nothing for his own kin. Enraged, the lieutenant colonel aimed his pistol at the captain, who showed no fear. 2 gunshots later, silence reclaimed the submarine. The pirates were cruising aimlessly on the sea. Rock mentioned his past experience with diving, so after the ship docked, he planned to buy diving equipment. However, the price was too high and he couldn't bring himself to purchase it. Later, While calculating the annual expenses for the torpedo boat, Dutch returned carrying the very diving gear Rock had wanted, claiming it was a gift for him. Rock was overjoyed, but this played right into Dutch's trap. As it turned out, the Black Lagoon team had taken on a new job. Half a century ago, a German submarine received its final orders from its collapsing homeland to transport Japanese naval officer to Batavia. It was an incredibly long voyage. Under the captain's command, the submarine successfully navigated a route comparable to Magellan's circumnavigation. Yet, just as they were about to reach their destination, the Americans discovered and sank them, sending the entire crew into the abyss of the dark sea. But there was a hidden secret. Before the submarine departed, a major from the State Security Bureau had left Germany with the crew, carrying a painting titled Brunhilde Guiding the 12 Knights. The artist was said to be unknown, and though the painting's true value remained unclear, a Spanish antiquarian, who specialized in collecting Nazi-era artworks, had commissioned them to retrieve it. The painting had long been considered lost, but last year, a French telecom company discovered the submarine while repairing undersea cables, and remarkably, it remained watertight. The geopolitical situation in these waters was complicated, presenting them with an opportunity. According to intelligence, only the submarine's forward section had flooded, requiring Revy and Rock to enter through the torpedo tubes to seal the hatch. Once the breach was welded shut, they could open the interior doors. The mission was confirmed. Rock reluctantly put on the diving gear. He couldn't believe he had to perform underwater work. Revy urged him to double-check everything, infuriated by his careless attitude. Once submerged, they would only be able to locate each other via signal beacons. Dutch had also provided Revy with underwater firearms as a precaution. After final preparations, the two dove in and soon spotted the massive wreck resting on the seabed. Meanwhile, Benny noticed a ship approaching, far off standard shipping routes. Its presence was highly suspicious. Dutch immediately raised the Thai naval flag, disguising their torpedo boat as an official patrol vessel. The unidentified ship attempted contact but refused to answer any of Dutch's questions. Sensing danger, Dutch retreated to the control room, prepared for the worst, eliminating the threat and rescuing Revy. However, the enemy ship saw through their ruse, recognizing them as pirates. A barrage of missiles streaked toward the torpedo boat, forcing Dutch into a desperate escape. Below, Revy and Rock had already entered the submarine. The sunken tomb was about to be opened. The man casually pulled a skull out of the water, screaming in terror. Yet the place they had arrived at was an underground graveyard littered with corpses. Rock and Revy successfully entered the sunken German submarine, where sailors had lain dead for half a century. In this pitch-black darkness, the cruelest fate was suffocating on the brink of death. The two entered the inner compartment to find complete chaos, evidence of a brutal struggle. It turned out that when the submarine was trapped underwater, facing certain doom, the lieutenant colonel shot the captain, who had been cursing the Nazis. Crewmen rushed in at the sound of gunfire, and after a frenzied fight, several perished alongside the lieutenant colonel. Revy identified the bodies by their SS uniforms, but found no trace of the painting. Judging by the scene, the lieutenant colonel had likely instigated the conflict. The crew, avenging their captain, swarmed him, resulting in this carnage. A ship was like a family. With death certain, internal strife made no sense. The outsider must have provoked it. Then, Rock spotted something near a corpse. After wiping it clean, they confirmed it was the very painting they sought. Revy ordered Rock to secure it while she looted everything of value from the submarine. Dutch narrowly evaded enemy missiles on the surface, forced to anchor at a distance to observe. The hostile warship had positioned itself directly above the submarine, leaving no opportunity for intervention. Their objective aligned with Dutch's, to retrieve the painting from the depths. The warship's commander assembled a 5-man suicide squad. After an impassioned speech, they sang their national anthem in unison, a display Dutch clearly overheard. With Revy and Rock still inside the submarine and signal beacons unresponsive, all they could do was debate their beliefs. If given enough time, they might secure the painting first. But Benny soon detected enemy movement. A confrontation within the submarine seemed inevitable. Inside, Revy scavenged valuables while Rock hesitated. Medals were proof of soldiers' sacrifices. They had no right to take them. By the captain's remains, he found a family photograph. To outsiders, these were mere artifacts. But to the living, they held priceless memories. Revy lit a cigarette and challenged Rock, stripped to their essence. All objects were just things. Value came only from collective consensus money. Sentimental notions were delusions. Money meant power. As a child, she'd prayed for divine salvation, until police nearly beat her to death for living in slums. No gods, no strength, just cash and guns. Life was the only true equalizer. Rock apologized for stirring painful memories, but Revy shrugged it off. If he kept preaching about value, their partnership would end with a bullet. At that very moment, the submarine suddenly shook as the exit valve was being unscrewed. Revy immediately tensed up, grabbing her gun and ordering Rock to take cover where bullets couldn't reach him. Only ghosts or scoundrels would knock in a place like this. With just one exit leading outside, they were trapped. Once all the intruders descended into the submarine, Revy told Rock to retrieve the painting, but the clumsy man tripped over a corpse, sending the artwork sliding straight toward the enemy. The soldiers seized it and began retreating. Revy refused to let them escape. She suited up in diving gear and pursued them. The soldier carrying the painting alerted his commander about the chase. Benny, tracking the signal beacon's movement, panicked. Revy was clearly charging into a fight, but her equipment was no match for theirs. Surfacing blindly meant certain death, and backup wasn't an option without dooming everyone. Sure enough, the enemy had mounted a heavy machine gun on their ship. The moment Revy surfaced, bullets rained down. Rock yanked her back as she tried to advance. They stood no chance. Watching the two sink beneath the waves, the commander assumed they'd drowned and ordered a withdrawal. It wasn't until dusk that Rock and Revy made it back to their boat. The mission had failed, but this wasn't over. If word got out, their reputation and business would be ruined. The captain was overjoyed to obtain the painting. With this artwork, the benefactor who promised them enormous retrieval funds would financially support their minority faction and introduce them to the anti-communist union. Dutch, however, sensed something amiss. Why would the enemy invest such massive manpower and equipment for a single painting? The scale of resources far exceeded the objective's worth. Rock couldn't shake a bad premonition. Revy, frustrated by the mission's failure, brushed off Rock's attempt to apologize for the submarine incident. Dredging up the past was pointless. Their torpedo boat shadowed the warship undetected. Once the moon set, Dutch and Revy would strike under the cover of lax security. The two sped toward the warship on a dinghy, while the crew drank and celebrated. By the time anyone noticed the intruders, it was too late. Revy gunned down unprepared soldiers without hesitation, soon filling the cabin with corpses. From afar, Benny and Rock silently watched the gunfight unfold. Neither had the stomach for pulling triggers. Their role was simply to guard the base. Meanwhile, the commander rushed into the armory to load the machine gun, only for Revy to appear behind him and gun him down. While Revy wreaked havoc downstairs, Dutch seized the opportunity to head upstairs. After taking out an entire squad, he pinpointed the commander's location, just as he realized Revy had gone silent. Revy stormed into the control room, ready to shoot unarmed crew members, but Dutch intervened, knocking her gun aside. He demanded to know what she thought she was doing. Mercenaries killed for profit, but mindless slaughter was for psychopaths. One mistake could get them both killed. If she couldn't handle the job, she should quit. As they argued, an enemy squad silently surrounded them. Dutch and Revy aimed their guns at each other, then instantly spun and mowed down the ambushers. Now wasn't the time for infighting. Elsewhere, the warship's captain frantically called his benefactor, reporting intruders and assuring him the crew was fighting back. The man on the line dismissed empty promises. He demanded proof of victory. He wanted the painting. The captain sought entry into his world. Without evidence, trust was impossible. Meanwhile, Revy gradually steadied herself. She always acted erratic when new members joined. Benny had triggered an episode too. No sooner had she parted ways with Dutch than some fool kicked down a door, bragging about his pistol. Revy ignored him, calmly reloaded, and put a bullet through his skull. Any gun would do, as long as it hit. Dutch barged into the captain's quarters, startling him so badly he fell back into his chair. Seeing the captain on the phone, Dutch politely gestured for him to finish the call. The man on the other end took an interest in Dutch and instructed the captain to hand him the phone. Dutch, having questions of his own, seized the opportunity. His first question was about the true nature of the painting. Beyond the official story, rumors claimed Hitler himself had painted it, but that was false. Even the lieutenant who originally transported the piece believed it was Hitler's work. The real value, however, wasn't the painting itself, but what was hidden inside. The Spanish collector who hired Dutch's crew turned out to be the very man on the phone. Orchestrating their clash had been part of his plan. He then recounted a story. On the day the SS Security Service's founder finalized his plans, funds were consolidated, and a ledger bearing every member's signature and account details was created. That archive was split and concealed within 4 paintings, the one in question being the last. All he wanted was the painting returned. As the employer, he reminded Dutch that breaking their contract would ruin his reputation. Though furious, Dutch had no choice but to comply. The captain couldn't accept the truth. They'd been played. The man on the phone showed no mercy. Both the captain and Dutch had been given the same chance, but the captain failed. Dreaming of joining our world with that level of incompetence is delusional. After exchanging some colorful words, Dutch smashed the phone. When Revy entered and saw things unresolved, she proposed a gamble. Tossing her gun to the captain, she dared him to use it. He pointed it at his own head, but couldn't pull the trigger. Screaming, he instead aimed at Dutch, only to find the chamber empty. 2 guns now trained on the captain, the mission was over. Dutch fired a flare, signaling for extraction. As they waited, Revy vented her frustration. Rock didn't belong with them. It wasn't dislike, just an irreconcilable difference. They'd never mesh. After Dutch and Revy slaughtered an entire ship of Nazi remnants, the Black Lagoon crew returned to their daily routine. With Dutch and Benny occupied with their own tasks, the job of making deliveries fell to Rock and Revy. Since the last incident, the atmosphere between them had grown awkward. Revy avoided being around Rock, while he treaded carefully to avoid angering her. Their first stop was delivering liquor to a brothel nightclub, where Revy effortlessly handled the island's sly operators. Next, they delivered a message to Balalaika, who was working as a content moderator, completely disillusioned with the world. That evening, there would be a meeting about unauthorized drug trafficking, and Balalaika instructed them to report any leads. Only one stop remained: picking up firearms from the church. Revy knocked on the door just as the staff were folding freshly laundered sheets. Sister Ida had the goods moved to the warehouse before leading them to the one-eyed elder nun, Yolanda. While the firearms order was complete, the Arwen 37 launchers were delayed. Not due to unavailability, but because another client had priority. Pay more if they wanted them now. Revy refused to accept this last-minute change. Drawing her gun, she faced off against Ida's Glock 17. The nuns, seasoned veterans, remained unfazed by Revy's threats, bluntly telling her to send Dutch for negotiations. Meanwhile, Rock calmly set down his teacup and smoothly shifted the conversation to tea varieties with Yolanda. A former salesman, Rock lacked combat skills but excelled in negotiation. Starting with red tea, he found an opening, then steered straight to the point. He knew the church people were trafficking drugs through unofficial channels, which prompted both Hotel Moscow and the mafia to investigate. They searched all likely places but found no leads, because the blind spot existed where no one thought to look, like those who could easily cross borders through religious connections. The Charity Foundation workers had no idea they were transporting drugs, and why would freshly laundered bedsheets be stored in a warehouse instead of dormitories? Unless they contained something illicit. Yolanda wouldn't admit drug trafficking just because of Rock's speculation, but Rock never made claims without evidence. The weapon shipment quantities didn't match the ledger records, a discrepancy easily verified. After exposing the truth, Rock offered benefits too, though Black Lagoon and Hotel Moscow maintained friendly relations. Keeping this secret wasn't impossible. The nun smiled. This had been her test all along, and Rock barely passed. Ida holstered her gun and added the launcher to the inventory list. Yolanda told Revy to learn from Rock. Business couldn't be done just by waving guns around, though having no guns at all wouldn't work either. After completing their mission, the two went to a roadside stall to eat noodles. Revy still gave Rock the cold shoulder, even suggesting he quit and return to Japan. But Rock calmly fired back. Wasn't it Revy who dragged him onto this pirate ship in the first place, and who had just resolved their earlier problem? Not everything could be solved with guns and knives. Rock knew Revy was still upset with him over the submarine incident, but he wouldn't apologize again. Taken aback, Revy interpreted his words as a challenge. Rock slammed his bowl down and shouted at her. He had done nothing wrong, so there was nothing to apologize for. That was all he meant to say. Revy's expression instantly darkened. She drew her gun and aimed straight at Rock's forehead, pulling the trigger, but the shot went wide. At the last second, Rock had knocked the barrel upward and flung the gun away. Grabbing Revy by the collar, he snarled that he'd had enough. He'd finally escaped having to kowtow to bosses, only to end up bowing to a woman's temper as a pirate. Rock accused Revy of pretending to be ruthless, while being too greedy to face her own flaws. Revy, quick to anger, snapped back. How could someone like him, raised in comfort, possibly understand how she'd survived? Rock didn't understand Revy, but she didn't understand him either. No matter how someone lived, suffering was inevitable. He couldn't fathom why she insisted on playing the tragic heroine. Furious, Revy spat that this wasn't some Hollywood crime fantasy. Rock idolized. There were no Robin Hoods here. Then she'll become Robin Hood. Better that than whining forever. Revy finally lost it and punched him square in the face, but Rock took the hit without flinching. He reminded her he was here because of her. She had saved him from his soul-crushing corporate life, from being discarded and murdered by his bosses. Now, all he needed was a place to drink, and she was the one who taught him that. What he couldn't stand was realizing Revy had started acting just like those who betrayed him. With everything laid bare, Revy dropped her sulking, though not without some tsundere bickering, like children squabbling. At that moment, a group of police officers surrounded them. They had received reports of a disturbance at the market. Fortunately, the police chief was an old acquaintance of Black Lagoon. As long as they followed the rules here, the authorities didn't care what they did. The two got into the police car just for formalities, even smoking inside. Revy finally asked Rock where he really wanted to belong. Rock replied, "Right here." As they lit each other's cigarettes, it almost felt like exchanging a smoke-filled kiss. Once a Tokyo salaryman, now a cargo handler in the South China Sea, his job was simple. Buyers inspected the goods, signed off, and he retrieved the returned items. But Rock never expected the returned goods to be a child. Their role was just transportation. The boy was to be handed over to a Colombian cartel representative. Revy dragged the kid into the cabin to guard him as the torpedo boat headed back. Rock was overwhelmed with guilt over trafficking a child, but Dutch reminded him they were just couriers. Deliver the cargo, reach the destination, and their responsibility ended. The boy had guts. He even threw soup in Revy's face. Revy's temper flared instantly, ready to put a bullet in him. Rock had to step in, taking over guard duty, only to get pizza thrown at him instead. Yet his ordinary demeanor made the boy lower his guard. Despite knowing he'd be sold, the boy showed no fear. He was certain his father would rescue him. He claimed to be Garcia, the future head of the Lovelace family, one of South America's 13 noble houses. Rock didn't buy it. The Lovelace family was the most down-and-out aristocracy in the region. Garcia admitted things were rough. His father stubbornly refused to modernize, clinging to their farmland. But when rare earth deposits were discovered in their soil, the Colombian cartel tried to force a sale. When his father refused, they wrecked the farm and kidnapped him. Hearing this, Rock finally realized something was wrong, especially when Garcia accurately described the type of rare earth in their farmland, and even the appearance of their family dog. Rock informed Dutch about Garcia's noble lineage. Revy thought Rock was being overly sympathetic again, though that might be part of it. The real issue was that the people who handed them the cargo had lied, and lies meant trouble. Having worked in the supply department of his former company, Rock knew all about rare earth and the Lovelace family. Garcia wasn't lying. Dutch was now confused. If the goal was intimidation, kidnapping the boy would have been enough, so why secretly sell him? Revy figured it was about saving face with the mafia, a way to vent frustration. With too many factions involved, Dutch couldn't make a clear judgment. He called Balalaika to investigate the connection between the Colombian cartel and the Lovelace family. Coincidentally, Balalaika had also received a request from the cartel, so she agreed to discuss it at the bar after their return. Dutch asked Rock one last question. Would the Lovelace patriarch be the type to hire mercenaries to retrieve his son? Rock doubted it. The family was so financially strapped they could barely afford a maid. Meanwhile, that very maid had arrived on the island. She wandered around, asking for locations where South Americans gathered. After some inquiries, she finally found the Yellow Flag Bar. The torpedo boat docked, and Dutch's group drove to the bar. Rock complained that Revy was too rough with the child, but Revy mocked him. saying he should go be a butler surrounded by a dozen servants. Garcia retorted that his family only had one maid named Roberta. Though she couldn't clean or do chores, she was still far better than Revy. Revy burst out laughing, unfazed. But Rock seriously asked Garcia if he had ever seen the maid's true strength. Garcia used to love arm wrestling with Roberta. He always won. But once, during a match, gangsters came to threaten his father again. Roberta immediately noticed and froze. No matter how hard Garcia strained, he couldn't budge her hand an inch. That was when Garcia realized Roberta had been letting him win all along. She must have had a reason for pretending to be just a maid. Meanwhile, Balalaika also received intel on the Lovelace family. On the surface, they seemed like an unremarkable, impoverished, noble house. But if you looked closely at the maid's eyes, recognized the gaze of a soldier. At the same time, the maid Roberta arrived at the bar and asked the bartender about where Colombians gathered. The bartender slid her a beer, but refused to answer. Just as Roberta crushed the glass in her hand, a group of Colombian gangsters stormed in. They'd heard a maid was asking around for them. It was clear she had lured them out on purpose. Now that they'd taken the bait, Roberta's objective was complete. When Revy and the others arrived at the bar, they saw a maid wielding a shotgun disguised as an umbrella. She blasted a hole straight through one of the gang members. Enraged, the other gangsters drew their pistols and fired at her in unison. The maid opened her umbrella to block the bullets, but the fragile fabric was quickly riddled with holes. Just as everyone assumed she had been taken down, the unharmed maid raised her gun and switched to slaughter mode. The Black Lagoon crew quietly ducked under a table, deciding to abandon Garcia and make a run for it. They had no intention of getting involved. Before leaving, Rock told Garcia to hide and follow the maid home once the shooting stopped. But the boy burst into tears, terrified by the maid's brutality. He knew Roberta wasn't ordinary, but he never imagined she could kill. The bartender, calculating who to bill for the damages, noticed Revy and the others sneaking out, only for the gunfire to abruptly cease. The Colombian gangsters were stunned to discover Black Lagoon and their cargo. Roberta spotted Garcia, who instinctively stepped back. Realizing she had frightened him, she knew she owed him an explanation later. But first, she had to take him home. Then she turned her gun on Rock. Garcia immediately shielded him, but Revy suddenly lunged forward, seizing Garcia and threatening Roberta. If she didn't open fire, Garcia would return unharmed. After dispatching a thug attempting to ambush her, Roberta recited the Lovelace family creed. She would bring Garcia back safely, but everyone else present had to die. She pulled out a submachine gun from her suitcase and unleashed a furious barrage of bullets at Revy. While dodging, Revy dashed toward the bar counter under the terrified gaze of the bartender, only for Roberta to fire a grenade. Unable to evade in time, Revy was struck. Fortunately, the gang leader ambushed Roberta, diverting her attention. Dutch and the others rushed to check on Revy. Though her injuries weren't severe, the concussion had knocked her unconscious. As the group prepared to retreat, Garcia grabbed Rock's hand, pleading to be taken along. This version of Roberta terrified him. Roberta froze, watching helplessly as Rock led Garcia away. The gang leader coldly recited Roberta's real name. After deserting the Colombian Revolutionary Army, she had been hunted by both cartels and Interpol. The Colombians had even placed a $400,000 bounty on her head. Bringing her skull back would secure his rise as the cartel's new leader. The maid turned and bowed farewell. Then several grenades rolled from beneath her skirt. 1 second after Dutch's crew fled the bar, the explosion engulfed the building in flames. Yet they all knew, an explosion of that scale wouldn't kill Roberta. They sped to the docks by car. Roberta's codename, the Hound, meant prey she bit never survived. Upon hearing of the bar's carnage, Balalaika mobilized her squad. Soon, Roberta caught up in her car. Dutch riddled the hood of Roberta's vehicle with bullet holes, but Roberta countered by grabbing Dutch's wrist and yanking half his body out the window. Had Roberta's car not stalled, Dutch would have been finished right there. Benny drove at full speed toward the docks, when suddenly, Roberta's car crashed down from a rooftop onto Benny's vehicle, her own car plowing straight through a storefront window. Moments later, Roberta emerged unscathed and sprinted toward the Black Lagoon crew. Even as Benny hit the gas at the last second, Roberta used her knuckle dusters to climb aboard. Dutch turned to shoot, but Garcia's interference cost him the perfect chance. Roberta climbed onto the roof and fired into the cabin, forcing the car to careen straight toward the docks. Benny had no choice but to ram into a shipping container to stop. Everyone inside survived relatively unharmed, except Roberta, who was flung out and left dangling upside down from the container. Yet despite the brutal impact, she stood up as if nothing had happened. Fortunately, the jolt revived the unconscious Revy. Seeing Roberta still alive, she seized the chance to vent her rage. Both women wanted the other dead. This was a showdown between the two strongest women in the world. Revy and Roberta traded gunfire with dual pistols, soon vanishing into the maze of shipping containers. After a fierce exchange, Revy took a bullet to the shoulder while Roberta lost one of her guns. Dutch and Benny, hiding in the car, considered making a run for it, but when lightning seemed to crackle across the battlefield, they wisely stayed put. Women's fights are terrifying. Then Garcia suddenly pulled a baffling move.
Don't you let that woman beat you!
It was nothing short of pouring gasoline on the fire. The gunfire grew closer as Revy and Roberta crashed into each other from opposite ends of the shipping container, both aiming at each other's chests the moment they hit the ground. Just then, headlights flooded the dark docks. Balalaika and her men had surrounded them. Hotel Moscow had already gone to war with the Colombian cartel, wiping out their stronghold and capturing their leader. The Garcia kidnapping case was settled. Roberta no longer had a reason to fight. Yet neither Revy nor Roberta lowered their guns. Today, one of them had to die. Balalaika smirked as their weapons were simultaneously knocked away. This wasn't a request, it was an order. The three most dangerous women in the world stood together, though Dutch's attention was fixed on the armed soldiers surrounding them. Russian mobsters, yet dressed in military uniforms. Then Balalaika revealed the truth. Roberta was no ordinary maid. She was a Colombian guerrilla trained in assassination in Cuba, a wanted terrorist for kidnapping and murder. Roberta had joined the Revolutionary Army believing in justice, carrying out terror attacks and assassinations under orders. But in the end, she realized what she had trusted was never justice at all. The revolutionaries had allied with the cartels, turning her into nothing more than a watchdog for crime and drugs. So she deserted. The man who hid her was none other than Garcia's late father, her own father's closest friend. That was how she became the Lovelace family's maid. But to rescue the kidnapped Garcia, she had no choice but to revert to the terrifying Hound once more. This was the only thing left for her, the so-called watchdog. Garcia threw himself at Roberta, sobbing. He refused to let her call herself a watchdog. That sign-stained Hound died long ago. The Roberta standing here now is family. But Revy refused to back down. Roberta had blown a hole through her shoulder, and they both insisted on a perfect ending. So the two women launched into another brutal round of hand-to-hand combat. The scene grew increasingly violent as Balalaika and Dutch placed bets while watching, while Rock attempted to intervene, only to be shouted down by the enraged fighters. The prolonged brawl ended in a draw. Roberta, barely able to stand, leaned on Garcia for support. Balalaika ordered her men to escort them to the airport. Roberta asked Garcia to retrieve her glasses, no ordinary spectacles, but her seal. Revy, thoroughly beaten, remained unconscious even after being doused with a bucket of water. With the matter settled, Rock voiced his lingering question after Balalaika left. What's the deal with this Russian mob? They move like an army. Balalaika was a former Soviet Special Forces operative, her subordinates all battle-hardened veterans. Her organization was essentially a killing machine. This man is a triad boss modeled after Chinese actor Chow Yun-fat, his power rivaling that of Russian gangster Mr. Chang. On this small island, criminal organizations from various countries have established their own territories. Just now, the Hong Kong Triad's branch was suddenly bombed. Mr. Chang arrived at Black Lagoon's office with his men, delivering a deadly mission. He had captured a merchant smuggling arms illegally, only to discover he was actually a Bulgarian intelligence officer. To avoid meeting a gruesome fate, the man revealed an important document, a terrorist attack plan targeting the United States. The bombing of the U.S. embassy, as repeatedly reported in the news, was carried out by this group. Adhering to the principle that business knows no borders, Mr. Chang sought to negotiate with them, but they coldly rejected his offer and blew up his office. To transport the document off the island, Mr. Chang dispatched 5 teams, each heading to a different destination, but only one carried the genuine file. The Black Lagoon team was one of them, bound for a local military base on Basilan Island, with a deadline of 2 days. Once the time elapsed, the CIA liaison would leave. The tight schedule was unavoidable. as terrorists had already begun their operations. Mr. Chang assured Dutch that upon arrival, his men would guide them safely. At that moment, Revy spotted heavily armed terrorists downstairs, firing a rocket launcher at the window. She yelled, "Enemy attack," and bolted. As the rocket exploded, the terrorists stormed forward. Mr. Chang's movements had long been compromised, though fortunately, no one was injured. Dutch grumbled about canceling the deal, but backing out now meant forfeiting even repair fees. Seizing twin pistols, Mr. Chang burst out of the room alongside Revy, calmly kicking away incoming grenades. As fellow Chinese and sharpshooters, their coordination was seamless, covering Black Lagoon's retreat to the exit. After exchanging the code phrase, the car sped toward the harbor. Meanwhile, the anti-American organization was also plotting to retrieve the attack plan. Among them was a Japanese man named Takanaka, who always worked at a leisurely pace, much to the frustration of his partner Ibraha. Originally, the operation was supposed to end with the bombing of the Triad's office. Who would have guessed Mr. Chang would complicate things by arranging 5 separate transport routes? Takanaka immediately dismissed the other methods as too conspicuous, leaving only maritime shipping as the viable option. Declaring himself in charge, Takanaka left to oversee the operation. Elsewhere, Revy grumbled aboard the ship about the Triad's amazingly terrible code phrases. While their fashion and taste were impeccable, their sense of humor was shockingly bad. Upon arriving at the airport, Takanaka received word that Black Lagoon's torpedo boat had already been spotted. He ordered his men to stand by until his arrival, before searching for connecting flights to Southeast Asia. There, he encountered a Japanese man who asked for a light and found Takanaka oddly familiar, unsurprising, given that Takanaka was a nationally wanted terrorist. The fact that he could still board flights was impressive in itself. At night, Revy noticed a suspicious vessel tailing them, prompting Dutch to realize they'd been compromised. He ordered Rock and Revy to disembark discreetly and proceed to Basilan Island while he and Benny acted as decoys on the boat. Simultaneously, Takanaka arrived at the decoy unit's camp on Basilan Island, a special anti-guerrilla operations base that allowed U.S. military agents free access, making it the obvious target for Mr. Chang's plan. Takanaka confidently claimed to have unraveled Mr. Chang's scheme, but Ibraha dismissed it as nonsense. Dutch prepared the speedboat for a split maneuver, planning to regroup at the base after completing the mission. Revy peeked into the case and confirmed it contained the genuine document. Dutch then handed her another note. Mr. Chang had sent additional instructions, which she was supposed to relay to Rock. Without a second thought, Revy tucked the note into her chest, completely forgetting to inform Rock. Under cover of darkness, the speedboat slipped away while the torpedo boat continued past Basilan Island. At dawn, Rock and Revy finally landed on Basilan Island. The town on the island was eerily desolate, with constant gunfights driving away all the ordinary civilians. Just then, a car approached from behind. Revy instantly shoved Rock aside and swiftly drew her gun, but the vehicle stopped right in front of her. The driver was none other than Takanaka, disguised as the contact. Revy holstered her weapon and exchanged code phrases with him, but Takanaka played dumb until Revy lost her patience. Only then did he finally recite the Triad's passphrase.
Exactly, you stupid asshole.
It turned out that Mr. Chang had already prepared a new passphrase to prevent leaks. The moment Takanaka recited the code phrase, he revealed his true identity. Both immediately drew their guns and opened fire at each other. Takanaka used his car to intercept Rock, who was trying to escape, while a thug knocked Rock unconscious and threw him into the vehicle. Revy couldn't react fast enough to stop it. Takanaka sped away with Rock in tow, while ambush vehicles swarmed in to block the road, setting up machine guns and unleashing a barrage of bullets at Revy. Outnumbered and outgunned, Revy had no choice but to scramble for cover in the alleyways. Just then, a car pulled up behind her. A woman flung, throwing knives to eliminate the pursuers, and swiftly whisked Revy away. These were the actual operatives Mr. Chang had arranged for extraction. Revy demanded to go back for Rock, but Shenhua's mission was strictly to deliver her to the government military base. When Revy refused to comply, Shenhua pressed a blade to her throat, yet Revy stood her ground. With Mr. Chang's crucial document now in the hands of the abducted Rock, how could the mission possibly succeed without retrieving it? The unlucky Rock was taken to the guerrilla camp. Ibraha eventually showed up as well, but the briefcase in Rock's hands turned out to be empty. Takanaka, in no particular hurry, led Rock into a dark room for a heart-to-heart. Both being Japanese, Takanaka tried to ease Rock's guard by making small talk, but Rock wasn't fooled. Takanaka's name was infamous back in their homeland, though unlike Rock, he hadn't been driven out. Unfazed, Takanaka calmly explained that he had left Japan by his own will, staking everything on a grander purpose. The only real difference between them, he mused, was their goals. Ibraha, however, had no patience for this and pressed a gun to Rock's head, demanding to know where the document was. Undeterred, Takanaka continued weaving his tale. Once, there was a man who came to their town, standing on a street corner day after day, delivering impassioned speeches. At first, people listened. Some even joined his cause. But over time, interest faded. Yet the man refused to stop, even when no one paid attention anymore. One day, a passing child asked him why. The man admitted that he had once believed he could change people's minds, but eventually realized it was an impossible dream. Still, he had bet his entire existence and beliefs on it. If he stopped fighting, he would cease to be. The story was likely referencing Japan's leftist movements in the 1962nd. Rock remained silent even after hearing it. Seeing no point in wasting more time, Takanaka concluded that Rock, not being a soldier, had no oath to uphold. Left alone, he'd crack eventually. If he didn't talk by tomorrow, they'd just shoot him. Since the document wasn't on him, it had to be with Revy, and she would undoubtedly come back to save him. Meanwhile, Revy and Shenhua were already lying in ambush outside the military camp, waiting for sunset to begin their operation. Takanaka remained unhurried, but Ibraha was practically on fire with impatience. The Thai investigation team had confirmed that the remaining 3 groups were decoys. The document had to be with the Black Lagoon crew. Takanaka, however, pointed out that the squad searching for Revy had gone silent. No sooner had he spoken than gunfire erupted inside the camp. Revy and Shenhua stormed in, cutting down enemies left and right. After rescuing Rock, they immediately jumped into a car to escape, only to find their driver high out of his mind, flooring the gas pedal straight into enemy territory. Spotting this, Ibraha led a furious chase, turning the island into a high-speed battlefield. Rock, troubled by his thoughts, tried to say something to Revy, but she was too busy playing rock-paper-scissors with Shenhua to decide who would fight first. Shenhua climbed onto the roof, twin blades flashing as she bisected a sniper in one strike, though the sudden movement sent their vehicle careening out of control. Revy then stomped over Rock to join Shenhua on the roof, the 2 women wrestling for kills while their driver screamed about heading to a nudist beach. In short, nobody was sane except Rock. With only half an hour left until the deadline, a frantic CIA agent called Mr. Chang, who calmly told him to prepare the money and wait. All they could do now was wish Rock luck. The guerrillas opened fire with machine guns, forcing Shenhua, whose weapon had too long a cooldown, to yield the spotlight to Revy, who returned fire under the hail of bullets. Though Shenhua acknowledged Revy's skill, she despised firearms, believing blades and the body to be the world's finest weapons. Yet even blades chip, she mused. Guns surpass blades, and atomic bombs surpass guns. Yet such power rests only in politicians' hands. Noticing Rock's gloom, Revy tossed him a cigarette, but instead of cheering up, he only sank deeper into despair. The driver, hallucinating a path lined with bikini-clad women cheering him on, crashed straight into the government military camp. The guerrilla's vehicle broke down midway, and in a fit of rage, Ibraha mobilized every last soldier in the camp. Today, he swore, would end in a decisive battle against those government troops. Takanaka thought Ibraha had lost his mind. This would get them all killed. But Ibraha, consumed by grief over his son's death, refused to listen. As they argued, Takanaka shot Ibraha dead and ordered the remaining forces to retreat. Ibraha had been a good comrade, but dwelling on the past would change nothing. Before dawn, Rock and Revy managed to meet the CIA contact on time, only for Rock to realize he had left the briefcase back at the camp. But Revy casually pulled the document from her chest. She had hidden it long before they even reached the island. Though Revy was a wanted fugitive in the US, arresting her wasn't the CIA's priority. They might even need her for future jobs. With the mission finally complete, Rock stepped forward to thank her, but Revy swore she'd never risk her neck again to save an idiot like him. Recently, the city of Ronapur, where they are located, has been experiencing frequent murders, and all the homicides have been targeting the Moscow hotel. This month alone, 6 bodies of Russians have been discovered. The balance of power among the city's factions is maintained by a thin thread. In response, Mr. Chang from the Triad invited the other 3 major factions to a liaison meeting. The Italian and Russian mafias have always been at odds. As for the Colombian drug dealer targeted by Roberta in the first season, they now dare not offend the Russian mafia. Not only members of the Moscow hotel but also other factions have been killed. It can almost certainly be concluded that an external force is behind these acts. Mr. Chang proposed that everyone cooperate to find the killer. But the Russian mafia's balalaika couldn't care less. She will not let anyone who dares to threaten the Moscow hotel get away. Due to the frequent murders, everyone in the tavern has a gun strapped to their waist. The tavern owner excitedly told Revy about the $50,000 bounty on the killer. Revy also wanted to get involved, but unfortunately, there are no clues about the killer at all. If outsiders were responsible, there would at least be some traces. Someone must be hiding the killer. The owner just asked that they not cause trouble in his bar, as his bar has already been ransacked several times. At this moment, a hot woman sat down next to Revy. Rock recognized her as Ida, who had previously traded guns at the church. However, Ida wasn't there to argue with Revy. News of the bounty on killers had spread, and many assassins had rushed over. If Revy kept slacking, the bounty would be gone. Meanwhile, people from the Moscow tavern were killed again. By then, Balalaika had already arrived at the scene. From the police blocking the area, she learned the full story from the surviving bartender. At 4 a.m., a pair of twins entered the bar, presenting Balalaika's business card to claim they had been authorized to pick up guests. The bartender, not thinking much of it, let them in. Soon after, the Moscow tavern's enforcers arrived on time to collect the debt. Just then, the boy gave a sinister smile, swung an axe, and killed the man. The girl pulled out a Browning M1918 and sprayed the crowd with gunfire. The enforcers were also shot in the legs and dragged away. They drove off in a black Japanese-made sedan, but their whereabouts remained unknown. Although the twins were white, they weren't from an English-speaking country and greeted people in a strange language. Balalaika ordered the sheriff to cover up the incident. If the military police got involved, it would be a mess. The victim wasn't just some ordinary thug, but a veteran who had fought alongside Balalaika. She had thought pairing people up would ensure safety, never expecting the killers to be children. She decided to hire outsiders for future searches and would never let her own people be sacrificed again. Just returned, Dutch informed everyone that Balalaika was preparing to deploy the guerrillas. Revy was stunned. Is this an attempt to destroy the entire city? The guerrillas were trained as veterans of the Afghan War for a potential World War I-II. Once deployed, they would become an entire killing machine. If the guerrillas were to be deployed, Dutch had already decided to flee immediately. At that moment, in a building, a group of Italian mafia members were shocked by the bloody scene in the room. The Moscow hotel official who had been brought back had been tortured to death by the twins. The man angrily told them to finish their work and leave immediately. Their mission was only to target Balalaika, yet now they had thrown the entire city into panic. These twins were complete psychopaths, and they were already planning to kill their employer as well. Rock couldn't understand why the killers, knowing who they had offended, would continue their actions. In this world, there are people called evil seeds. These individuals cannot live without doing crazy things, and they are bound to cause disasters. Their hatred runs so deep that they don't even know what they are hating. At this moment, Balalaika asked Rock which country's language the twins were speaking. Rock was initially at a loss. Suddenly, he realized the words seemed related to vampires. Meanwhile, the twins held hands to take a shower, then swapped their clothes and wigs. No one knew their true gender. Equipped, they disappeared into the city's thick fog. Rock guessed from the language that the twins came from Romania, the homeland of vampires. Balalaika had her men bring in someone involved in the pornography business and obtained twin-themed videos produced in Romania from them. After enduring a night of mental torment, Balalaika finally identified the twins' identities, Hansel and Gretel. During the turbulent period in Romania, a large number of orphans were sold to the black market to make perverted films. As an aftershow, the twins were made to assist in cleaning up the mess. To avoid becoming pig feed, the twins desperately learned murder methods to please the perverts, eventually twisting and falling completely into darkness. Balalaika met Mr. Chang at the dock and shared the intelligence she had gathered. This was undoubtedly a tragic story and a true reflection of their world. However, Balalaika sought not justice, but profit and trust. With the twins' identities known, it became easier to verify the mastermind behind them. The target was Balalaika, and the triad was completely innocent bystanders. Balalaika prepared to clean up the mess and asked Mr. Chang if he wanted to join. Hearing this, Mr. Chang readily agreed. Balalaika immediately gave orders. The Moscow Hotel and the Triad Alliance were about to launch an attack. The Italian mafia, facing the wrath of the Triad and the Moscow Hotel, was in chaos. Verrocchio was also on the verge of madness. His only target was Balalaika, but the situation had spiraled out of control. His subordinates suggested eliminating the twins to quell the disturbance, but Verrocchio beat them up instead. He had called the twins to kill Balalaika, and the forces behind him were highly dissatisfied with his position. If he didn't take control, he was finished. The twins, who had initially left, suddenly turned back, intending to use the Italian mafia as a farewell target. Verrocchio broke out in cold sweat as several guns were simultaneously pointed at the twins. On the other side, the members of the Triad surrounded the Italian mafia's stronghold. Suddenly, someone smashed through the window and landed heavily on the car roof. Seeing that a fight had already broken out, Mr. Chang informed the Moscow Hotel about the situation. At the same time, Revy received a call from Ida. Ida said the situation was very chaotic, making it the perfect time for them to claim the bounty. Revy quickly equipped himself and rushed out. As for Dutch and the others, they chose to watch the spectacle. Although the Italian mafia was in trouble, the Moscow Hotel's attack plan remained unchanged. They were determined to avenge their fallen comrades. The Moscow Hotel ordered the Triad to leave the scene immediately, but it was already too late. Mr. Chang pulled out his dual pistols and exchanged fire with the twins who burst out of the room. Due to the limited power of handguns, Mr. Chang had to retreat behind the car for cover. Fortunately, the twins had no intention of engaging further and simply left Mr. Chang behind. On the other side, numerous assassins were ambushed at the intersection, waiting for the target car. However, Ida found it strange. Why wasn't the most vengeful woman in the world on this road? If the target were to pass through here, Balalaika would surely have heavily armed troops waiting in ambush. But now, there were only a group of them here. After reasoning, Revy concluded that the twins would not pass through this place. Meanwhile, Mr. Chang knew Balalaika disliked the sheriff, so he pointed them in the opposite direction. Balalaika's side also took action. A black car sped from the intersection and quickly came under fire from the ambushed killers. The car crashed into a tree and was completely destroyed. However, inside the cabin were local children disguised as twins. Someone informed the patrol that they had gone south, so all the killers headed south. As for the twins, they were taking a small path to kill Balalaika and successfully entered the ambush circle of the Moscow Hotel. Under Balalaika's command, the soldiers drove the twins toward the designated route. Unaware of the truth, Ida and Revy rushed in to disrupt the situation, successfully blocking the twins. Gretel calmly asked how much their bounty was worth, then pulled out 150,000 from her bag to bribe Ida. Ida hesitated, but Revy didn't care. She wanted both the money and the kill. They are a pair of twin killers. They were sold into the black market to make perverted films. They eventually became terrifying psychopathic killers. They came to the city to assassinate the Russian mafia boss. But they just walked into the trap set by the Moscow Hotel. Balalaika was furious because her own people were killed. She even took aim at Ida and Revy. The twins casually exchanged fire with Balalaika's men. They decided to disrupt the enemy, to track down their headquarters. So the two split up. Unbeknownst to them, even the chaos was part of Balalaika's plan. The soldiers' task was to lure the twins to the target location, then deliver the fatal blow. This farce was about to come to an end. Meanwhile, Ida, who nearly got shot, scolded Revy for being greedy. The two started their usual argument, then suddenly felt empty. They earned nothing and wasted all their effort. Just as the two parted unhappily, a gun was pressed against Ida's head. Gretel, one of the twins, was waiting for them to split up, but she wasn't there to kill. After the other twin Hensel killed Balalaika, they needed a way to leave. because the Italian mafia who was supposed to help them had been killed by them. Now that the employer was already dead, Ida didn't understand why they still had to kill Balalaika. Gretel suddenly burst into laughter. Because they did it, just because they wanted to. The dawn was just breaking when Balalaika called out the twin Hansel hiding in the woods. Hansel pulled out an axe and provoked Balalaika with the soldiers, but she remained extremely calm. Before the twins died, they had to apologize for their actions.
I said kneel!
Hansel raised the axe and threw it at Balalaika, only for his left hand to be shot off in the next instant. It was then that Hansel realized he had entered a hunting ground, surrounded entirely by snipers. From the moment he stepped in, it was destined that he would die here. Hansel laughed when he heard this. He would not die. They had walked over countless corpses, plundered innumerable lives, and could continue to live off those lives. They were immortal. For her fallen subordinates, Balalaika could have tortured him cruelly, but she found no pleasure in such lowly acts. Instead, she would simply watch him die. In another 10 minutes, Hansel would bleed to death. Only several minutes after his death could she perform a requiem for her sacrificed soldiers. Hansel lay on the ground crying in agony, before finally ceasing to breathe. Hansel was killed by the Moscow hotel, while Gretel hitched a ride on Black Lagoon by threatening Ida. She sang in the cabin, her angelic voice completely unrelated to that of a psychopathic killer. The Black Lagoon team took on Gretel's mission to escort her away. Revy guarded the cabin entrance, while Rock stayed with Gretel. In front of Rock, Gretel seemed like an ordinary little girl. She could sense that Rock was different, as if from another world. Soon, Balalaika found out about Black Lagoon taking Gretel away. Balalaika questioned Dutch, asking if he knew what he was doing. Dutch replied that it was just a job, unrelated to their stance. Soon, Benny spotted the Moscow hotel's missile ship south of their route. To avoid pursuit, they had to change course. Gretel felt downhearted, unable to see the sea. She had never seen the ocean before. She was born in a rocky mountain shrouded in dark clouds. Whether in the orphanage or Sicily, all she saw were gray high walls. A certain dictator in Romania issued a ban on abortion for the public, originally intending to create labor for the poor country. But the poorer they were, the more they had children, and the more children they had, the poorer they became. A large number of abandoned children were adopted by state-run orphanaries, becoming a supply source for secret police officers. Later, the dictator was overthrown, and the orphans were taken in by Sicily, living forever in blood and darkness. The twins wondered why the gods made them suffer so much. When they were ordered to kill other children, everyone was laughing. At that moment, they realized the world ran on killing. Rock asked if she didn't feel sad about her brother's death, but when Gretel took off her wig, her voice changed. They were one, and would forever exist in this world of slaughter. Rock, heartbroken, hugged Gretel tightly. Blood and darkness were just a small part of it. Gretel, blushing, told Rock not to be sad. She had never met someone as kind as Rock before. Gretel lifted her skirt, offering herself as a gift, but when Rock saw what was under her skirt, he silently slammed the door and walked away. Revy didn't hesitate to punch Gretel. She actually shared the same thoughts as Balalaika and warned her that if she provoked Rock again, she would kill her. Upon seeing Revy, Gretel immediately changed her expression. She could tell Revy was her kind. Rock ran onto the deck in helpless rage, unable to understand why the twins had to be treated this way. Benny advised him to turn a blind eye. The child was already beyond redemption. If someone had been kinder to them back then, they could have had a normal childhood. But that wasn't how things turned out, so this was how it had to end. The torpedo boat docked to meet Elroy, who was in charge of the transfer. He would take Gretel away from there next. Gretel smiled and said goodbye to Rock, but suddenly Elroy shot her in the head. Bloodied, Gretel stared blankly at the sky before collapsing on the dock. Elroy had accepted the bounty from the Moscow hotel. His son had cancer. With a decent reward in hand, Elroy decided to quit. This was his last mission, and Black Lagoon's task was also completed. Dutch told Rock to cover the body with a tarp, but Rock said this was fine. Let her sleep while gazing at the blue sky and sea. The most profitable businesses in this dark zone are guns, drugs, and counterfeit money. Elvis, an American gangster, hired counterfeiter Jane to make fake money. However, when the agreed time came, Jane refused to deliver the goods, citing poor quality. Elvis then threatened her in person, and killed Jane's programmer companion. If she couldn't give an explanation within 2 days, the same fate awaited her. Of course, Jane wouldn't just wait to die. The next day, while the guards were using the toilet, she blocked one in the bathroom and knocked out the other before escaping. Meanwhile, Revy was woken up by the island's terrible heat. The overworked air conditioner simply gave out. So Revy went to the church to drink and chat with Ida, but the church had no air conditioning either, and the two were sweating profusely. Ida, gossiping, asked Revy how things were going with Rock. Revy impatiently complained that Rock was too weak and always wore employee uniforms, but what Ida really wanted to know was whether the two had slept together. Revy didn't know what to say and could only pretend to sleep by lowering her head. At this moment, Jane ran to the church and knocked on the door for help. Ida and Revy only reluctantly went to open the door after losing rock, paper, scissors. Jane persistently begged Ida to save her, but Ida had no intention of meddling in others' affairs. Just as she was about to close the door, Elvis shot a bullet into the door next to Ida, coincidentally shattering Revy's glass. This guy had just arrived and already provoked 2 of the 3 most dangerous women in the city. The intermediary Lobos tried to persuade Elvis not to act, but Revy had already thrown the gun to Ida. They unleashed a barrage of fire at Elvis. Angry women were terrifying to behold. Their pistols somehow fired with automatic rifle efficiency. Elvis's group was so suppressed they couldn't even get a shot off. The novice priest Rico even brought out an M60 machine gun. Lobos tried to clarify it was all a misunderstanding, but only succeeded in completely enraging Ida and Revy. The commotion naturally alerted the old nun Yolanda, who pulled out her golden desert eagle and joined the fight. Faced with such overwhelming firepower, Elvis could only flee in defeat. As for Jane, who had brought Elvis there, she naturally became the main subject of interrogation. Elvis had entrusted her with the task of forging old US dollars. The counterfeit design team was scattered across different locations, communicating online, and she was the team leader in charge of coordination. Jane had extremely high standards for the counterfeit money, but Elvis provided poor conditions and equipment, and lacked even the most basic patience. Jane went on at length about the counterfeit manufacturing process, making Ida and Revy increasingly irritable. Everyone believed it was due to Jane not keeping her promises. Jane knew gun-toting people couldn't understand her, but when Revy pointed a gun at her, she immediately backed down. Yolanda had no intention of getting involved and told Jane to use the counterfeiting plates in her bag to commission Black Lagoon. Jane tried to sell the counterfeit money to the church, but was refused. Revy, representing Black Lagoon, also rejected the commission. Seeing this, Jane could only pick up her bag and leave, but outside was full of dangers, and her head could explode at any moment. Ida recommended a hotel to her, where she could get a room by mentioning the church's name, though Jane would have to donate $300 to the church. This wasn't out of Ida's sudden kindness. As soon as Jane left, Ida traded her whereabouts for the reward money. On the other side, Elvis, who had been beaten by the church and hospitalized, naturally wouldn't give up on Jane. He assigned the task of capturing Jane to the cowboy Russell. Revy disapproved of Ida's dirty money-making methods and demanded half of the profits, but Ida insisted the money wasn't fully earned yet. As the two walked out of the bar, they passed by Russell, who was just entering. Too focused on making money, they failed to notice that the bar had already gathered various individuals. All of them were bounty hunters hired by Elvis to capture Jane. Jane's location had been identified, and their mission was to bring her back alive. However, the group was highly dissatisfied with Russell's arrogant attitude, and their response was no better. This infuriated Russell greatly. On the other side, Ida had Rock drive them to an alley. She claimed money would come if they just waited there, but Revy completely disbelieved Ida's nonsense. How would anyone come to such a remote place? Ida flirted with Rock, but Revy threatened her into revealing the plan. It turned out Ida had schemed both sides. She provided the correct hotel but the wrong room number, so the bounty hunters were fully prepared when they barged into the room next to Jane. The gunshots would wake Jane, and given her personality, she would definitely go out to investigate, encountering the bounty hunters. However, Jane would follow Ida's clues in the room to escape, likely ending up at their current location. Revy thought Ida was talking nonsense and told Rock to drive home and sleep. Just as Rock started the car to leave, Jane actually ran out of the alley. Ida greeted her, and Jane realized she had been set up. It turned out Ida had been after Jane's counterfeiting plates all along. Ida promised to save Jane if she handed them over, and with no other choice, Jane agreed. Ida stopped to let Jane in, leaving the pursuing bounty hunters stunned. Someone tried to recruit Ida, but she shot the speaker dead. She wasn't interested in such a small bounty. Then it was Revy's time to shine as Rock drove through a hail of bullets straight to the beach. When everyone learned Ida and Revy had joined the other side, they knew things had gotten complicated. Shenhua demanded Russell raise the reward to $30,000, or they would all back out. Russell thought it was outrageous to ask for more just because two small-time thugs joined, but Shenhua warned him this wasn't his Florida, and those two weren't ordinary thugs. The only fools in this city who didn't know them were outsiders. She told Russell to call the middleman to find out who Black Lagoon really was. Meanwhile, Rock drove several people to the port. Jane feared Ida would sell her again, but this time Ida had no such intention. She planned to have Black Lagoon transport Jane out using a torpedo boat. However, upon arriving at the port, they saw no ships. It turned out Dutch and Benny had taken the boat away after receiving a temporary assignment, so they had to go to the dock to contact Dutch first. Upon hearing that Revy had taken this job, Dutch could only breach the contract and discard the cargo they had just received. Fortunately, all losses were covered by the church. Jane hid in a warehouse, trying to hack into her own vault, but the firewall set by the dead programmer was too extreme. She couldn't even access her own money now. Bounty hunters had gathered outside the warehouse. Lobos called Dutch to apologize, saying those Americans didn't understand what this place was at all, and requested some time to stop the bounty hunters. After hearing the call, Benny asked Dutch if they had really been tainted by the city's evil deeds. He had thought he and Rock were exceptions, but Dutch realized there must be something deep inside them after all. On the other side, the bounty hunters had already launched an attack on the warehouse. However, Revy and Ida were well prepared, ambushing them at the door to counterattack. The Black Lagoon's newly repaired car was once again blown up by bullets. The surrounding enemies overwhelmed Revy, so she told Rock to take Jane to the back door first. Rock was now quite experienced, but just as they reached the back door, the janitor Sawyer broke in with a chainsaw. Rock, faced with a scene reminiscent of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, was instantly terrified. Revy had no choice but to rush to help, but she was too late. Just as Rock was about to be dismembered by the chainsaw, he grabbed an iron rack to barely block it. Meanwhile, Jane ran out the back door, only to be chased back by the fire-loving Claude, eventually taking refuge with Revy. Revy managed to drive Sawyer away with blind firing, but the shooters outside kept firing relentlessly, leaving those inside unable to move. Revy had no choice but to toss the grenade launcher to Ida. After a few grenade rounds, they finally forced the rooftop shooters to retreat. Rock pulled down the ladder, leading to the roof to help Jane up. Exhausted, Jane scolded Rock for having no plan, but he told her to shut up while he thought. To their surprise, Claude used a flamethrower to burn down the back door leading to the dock. Now, the roof was the only escape route. The enemies wouldn't let their prey burn, so they were sure to launch a full-scale assault next, sweeping in while the group took cover. Revy wasn't about to sit idle, but just as she went to turn off the lights, a machete flew through the window. Revy recognized its owner as Shenhua. By shouting, she confirmed Shenhua's position. The fire below was about to reach them, and their only option was to take out Shenhua and break through. Revy said she would lure Shenhua to the front, leaving the final shot to Ida. Revy kept firing, forcing Shenhua toward the window. The moment Shenhua's silhouette flashed past the window, Ida pulled the trigger. Just as Ida checked on Shenhua's situation, the rope on the machete tightly strangled her neck. If Revy hadn't pulled the rope to share the weight, Ida's head would likely have been ripped off. Sawyer took the opportunity to go to the rooftop and destroy the stairs. Ida told Revy to hurry and support Rock. After handing the gun to Ida, Revy left. Shenhua then climbed back to the window using the rope. Ida shouted for Revy to act, but Shenhua had already realized Revy wasn't there at all. Yet this time, she was wrong. The torpedo boat was racing toward the port at full speed. After seeing the situation at the port, Dutch erupted in anger. Sawyer chased Rock and Jane onto the rooftop. The two novices put up no resistance. Rock could only try to lure Sawyer onto the fragile roof, but to his surprise, Sawyer happily bounced around, deliberately avoiding the weak spot. Rock and Jane were sweating in panic as Sawyer approached them with a chainsaw. The sound of an explosion interrupted her. Sawyer reached into her pocket and realized her electrolarynx was missing. The next moment, she dropped the chainsaw and became an autistic patient. Rock inexplicably escaped danger. Just as Revy and Ida arrived, the roof collapsed in flames. The group experienced a deadly slide down the roof. As they slid down, Lawton introduced himself from a nearby rooftop, only to be shot by Revy. The dock completely collapsed. Fortunately, everyone was unharmed. Just as the torpedo boat was about to dock, they quickly rushed to the pier, with Russell chasing them with his men. The torpedo boat made a 180-degree turn as it approached the pier, and Rock and his companions leaped onto the boat. However, many others also boarded. In the hospital bed, Elvis shouted at Lobos to summon his country's military. Lobos reluctantly agreed but revealed the gun handle in his chest. Black Lagoon and Russell engaged in a fierce gun battle on the ship. Rock first took Jane into the cabin. Benny warmly invited Jane into his room. Dutch returned to the control room and decided to change direction drastically to shake off the bounty hunters. Revy and Ida held onto the ropes to avoid being thrown off the ship, but another enemy kept firing at Revy. Just then, Revy ran out of bullets. Revy picked up the hammer handed by Dutch and knocked the enemy off the ship. There were now 2 enemies left on the ship. Revy dealt with the fire-loving Claude, while Ida went to the engine room to find Russell. There were still 8 hours to go before reaching the destination dock. Jane asked Rock to bring her bag, but Rock did not. It was only then that they realized the bag had been left at the dock. Jane panicked. The counterfeiting plates were not in her hands at all, but in the vastness of the internet. She only needed to collect engineering data from various locations to create them. But now the data manager was dead, and the password changed every day. The counterfeiting plates could not be retrieved. If Ida found out she did not have the counterfeiting plates, she would definitely nail her to a wooden cross like Jesus. Jane wanted to borrow Benny's computer to try again. For tech geeks, computers are like wives. Benny would not lend out his wife, but agreed to help Jane crack the system. He was curious to see how strong the firewall was. When Ida found Russell, the guy was frantically dismantling the engine because he couldn't find the exit. Claude was holding a flamethrower, suppressing Revy and preventing her from getting close. He was a complete psychopath. He killed people just to enjoy the taste of bloody combat. He even burned his own wife to death with his own hands. Unfortunately for him, this time he encountered Revy. Revy tightened herself and gave a signal. Dutch immediately maneuvered the ship to turn and throw Claude off. Revy took the opportunity to shoot at him, making him explode into a firework in the air. Jane, who had just experienced another bump, was utterly speechless. After some operations, Benny surprisingly managed to crack the code. Jane happily gave Benny a deep kiss. Rock was stunned when he saw this. This bump also knocked off Ida's sunglasses, and she raised her gun to aim at Russell. Looking at Ida without sunglasses, Russell suddenly froze. He recognized Ida's face. It seemed like at one of the Senate's dinner parties, a woman was discussing state secrets with high-ranking officials, and that woman looked exactly like Ida. Ida denied it outright. However, there was one thing she could tell Russell, that she was born in Langley, Virginia, which is said to be the headquarters of the USCAI. Russell realized something but was shot in the head. Revy asked Ida if she had sent the enemy to hell. Ida showed her the Hold cowboy hat. Oh God, another peaceful day. 1 year after becoming pirates, Rock and Revy returned to their long-lost hometown during the new year. However, it was not for family visits, but as Balalaika's translators, accompanying the Moscow Hotel, which sought to enter Japan, to negotiate with local gangs. The Kanto Peace Council advocated for the expulsion of foreign forces, but the Washimin group, led by Bando, decided to cooperate with the Moscow Hotel to suppress the Kosa Council. The Washimin group expanded its influence with Balalaika's backing, lighting a new lamp in the city. To demonstrate her power, Balalaika had a club of the Kosa Council destroyed with a single phone call. Bando's men were so frightened they reached for their guns, but Balalaika had no intention of operating covertly from the start. This was a demonstration by the Moscow Hotel. They had come here to destroy everything that stood in their way. Bando had no objections, seeing it as fireworks, celebrating the Washimin group's development. After the meeting, Rock felt uneasy. He did not want his hometown to become a battlefield. Since there had been no major conflicts on the island recently, Balalaika had extended her reach to Japan. This was a woman who would start a war without a second thought. It was early in the year, and Revy found the roadside temple fair very fresh and interesting. so the two of them got off the bus midway to visit the fair. Revy excelled at the shooting game. Seeing Rock looking nostalgic, she asked if he was missing his family, but Rock said he didn't know why. The most familiar place gave him a feeling of being in a foreign country. His relationship with his family wasn't good. His older brother was very capable, but he himself had achieved nothing, so he didn't have high hopes for his family. Revy thought none of that mattered. Since his parents were still alive, he should go see them before his hands were stained with blood. In her eyes, Rock's family was just an ordinary one, living well without stealing or killing. Rock said he couldn't go back, and the fact that he had teamed up with Revy was the best proof. Revy gave a bitter smile and continued shooting at the targets, but the last doll didn't fall, which annoyed her. Revy pressed it down with her toy gun. She asked Rock to claim the first prize, but the stall owner refused to give it to them, accusing Revy of cheating. Coincidentally, both Revy and the owner had short tempers. Even though they didn't speak the same language, they argued using universal gestures. A man wearing sunglasses came over to mediate. Revy's temper wouldn't listen to reason, and the sunglasses man didn't seem ordinary either. The two were about to fight in the street when the girl accompanying the man suggested they sit down and drink some sweet wine. Rock raised his hand in strong agreement, so the four of them sat on a bench and drank sweet wine. The girl was a student named Yukio, whose father was the stall owner. The man, Jinji, was her father's apprentice. She realized Revy wasn't Japanese and asked about their backgrounds. Rock introduced himself as a translator for Russians, and Revy as his colleague. However, Ginji could tell at a glance that Revy wasn't ordinary because they carried the scent of their kind, but Ginji didn't say more. After resolving the matter, he left with Yukio. The Moscow hotel attacked the Kosa council office. Police arrived half an hour later and sealed off the scene. The Washimin group had already recorded the police radio communications. The details will have to wait for Rock's translation. The Japanese branch had actually been under Moscow boss Vasily all along, but he failed to manage it properly. That's why Balalaika stepped in with her men. Vasily was extremely displeased with Balalaika's arrogant attitude. He loudly berated her, demanding an apology, but Balalaika slammed Vasily's head onto the table. There were two things she couldn't stand in this world. One was cold Russian pancakes, and the other was cowardly security bureaus. If he didn't want to get shot, he should lower his head. Bando found Ginji, who was minding the stall, and asked how much longer this business would go on. Ginji thought this was much better than gray area business, which made Bando deny that he engaged in gray area business because he liked it. The former boss had taken him in when he came from Kyoto, but after the boss fell 3 years ago, the group's finances had been in constant trouble. He stayed because he had sworn brotherhood wine with the boss and the former Kosa Council president. The higher-ups wouldn't allow anyone to succeed the boss, but someone always had to do the job. Bando claimed he was doing big business with the Russians, but he admitted the Russians were untrustworthy. He hoped Ginji would step in and show him the executioner he once was. Ginji thanked Bando for taking care of the girl with his money, but what Bando was doing now had no trace of benevolence. He had followed the boss because the man was kind and righteous. Seeing he couldn't persuade Ginji, Bando had no choice but to leave. When Bando mentioned the Russians, Ginji asked if they had brought a translator. It seemed he had already guessed Rock's identity. Rock decided to return to his hometown at Revy's suggestion. Revy was drinking coffee in a nearby park, waiting for him. Just then, a group of children ran over to play a gunfight game. Revy became interested and joined in the fun with the kids.
Only place you'll see people go down like that is in movie.
When Rock discovered this scene, Revy blushed and dragged Rock away, warning him not to tell anyone. The reason Rock returned so quickly was that his family was not at home. Revy didn't understand why Rock didn't want to go home. A simple life would suit him better. On the other hand, the Moscow hotel had planned an attack on the Kosa Council base. Bando had arranged to meet Balalaika at a nightclub. The Kosa Council was a large organization, and this level of attack was not enough to eliminate them. Balalaika decided to launch the second phase, blocking the other party's financial sources and shutting down their profitable shops and venues. Of course, this was just a diversion. Their real target was to kidnap the family members of the Kosa Council president. Bando was shocked. Their goal was to relieve the pressure the Kosa Council was putting on the Washimin group. As long as they caused enough chaos, the rest could be resolved through negotiations. Balalaika laughed heartily after hearing this. It seemed these people still didn't understand. The Moscow hotel would go to any lengths to ensure profits and take on most of the risks. The decision-making power lay in her hands, not Bando's. Bando knew he was dealing with a dangerous situation and didn't know what to do. At that moment, Bando's subordinate's phone rang, drawing criticism from everyone. Bando couldn't give Balalaika an answer immediately, so he asked for some time to think. Balalaika gave him a symbolic show of respect. Just then, the man who answered the phone took an interest in Revy beside him, especially since he knew she was a bodyguard from the island. The meeting was briefly interrupted. Rock went to the toilet while Revy waited outside. Just then, Chaka came over to tease Revy and boast about how much of a jerk he was, but Revy didn't pay any attention to him. When Rock came out and saw someone harassing Revy, he prepared to take her away. But Chaka vented his anger on Rock instead, punching and kicking him while continuously provoking Revy. Just as Revy was about to shoot the guy, Banda arrived and stopped Chaka. But Rock tolerated this because he knew Chaka's intention was to provoke Revy into shooting. Revy was relieved. She didn't plan to strike first, but she would never let it go. If they attacked again, she wouldn't hold back. After the meeting, Bando ran to Genji's house to cook. Their original intention was to suppress the Kosa Council. When the time was ripe, the Kanto Peace Council would return to mediate. They only needed to pay some money to settle the matter. But the Russians' actions undoubtedly made things more difficult. Rock went out to help Benny buy local specialties and called to have Revy's gun delivered. This place was far from peaceful. Due to the snow, the tram service was suspended, so Rock decided to take a taxi back. He happened to meet Yukio at the station, so the two went to a cafe to chat while drinking. Yukio learned that Rock hadn't gone home. She felt Rock was like her former self. She used to hate her home too, but now she understood that it was her belonging. Rock wasn't sure. He wanted to leave but had too many attachments and lacked the courage to take the next step. People are like dice. They have to throw themselves out and decide their own direction. It is this ability that makes people free. At that moment, Genji called Yukio to say Bando had arrived. Hearing Bando's name, Rock was shocked and suddenly had a bad feeling. That's right. Yukio was the daughter of the deceased Washimin group leader. After the leader's death, many took advantage of the situation to pressure them, believing that only the leader's direct descendants could inherit the position. But Yukio was the only direct descendant, and as a student, she couldn't take over. After leaving Yukio's house, Bando was followed by police. The matter had already alarmed the authorities. The Moscow hotel showed no restraint, even blowing up the Kosa Council's car in front of the police station. Then Balalaika ordered the troops to relocate. Rock wanted to know what would happen if the Washimin group defaulted. Balalaika told him to mind his own business, but Revy spoke up for Rock. If the Washimin group defaulted, it would just mean adding one more name to the assassination list. After school, Yukio had arranged to study with classmates in the library, but her mind was full of last night's events. Genji had warned her to be cautious, as Rock was also Russian. In the evening, Bando seemed to have made some kind of decision. He dressed and armed himself, threw his gold watch to his underling, and told him to go to Genji for anything in the future. Then he left with a resolve to face death. His subordinates came to Genji to explain the situation, and they would soon face the Kosa Council's reprimand. Rock's sleep was restless. He and Balalaika were attacked by Bando in the underground garage, but Balalaika had anticipated and subdued Bando. All she sought was destruction and suppression. She had no interest in anything else. She then killed Bando without hesitation. Rock was awakened by Revy. A blizzard was about to sweep across Japan. After going through all this, Yukio realized she could no longer escape. She made up her mind to take over the Washimin group and step into the darkness. She is one of the most terrifying women in the world. Born into a military family in the former Soviet Union, Balalaika chose to join the army at a young age to restore her father's reputation. After countless battles, she became a cold-blooded soldier. However, after returning from the Afghanistan war, the country collapsed. Stripped of her military rank, Balalaika fell into despair, and her subordinates also fell into extreme poverty and misery. After her squad leader was killed due to debt, Balalaika finally woke up. She led her army to join the Russian mafia. Since then, they have fought in countless battles. Now they have expanded their operations to Japan, and their next target is the new leader of the Washimin group, Yukio. Yukio and her friend had just left the library. She cupped her friend's face and advised her to get along well with her mother. At that moment, several cars surrounded the empty space in front of the door. Under the escort of the Washimin group, their new leader Yukio said goodbye to her friend and left by car. After taking office, Yukio's first task was to find Balalaika's whereabouts, but the other party was well hidden, and conventional methods could not locate her. Although she had decided to step into the darkness, Yukio couldn't help but shed tears while looking at the night view outside the window. Soon after, Yukio held a meeting to announce that she would avenge Bando, but most members remained silent. At that moment, Bando's close aide, Yoshida, stood up for Yukio and scolded them as ungrateful people. Then Ginji took the lead and acted alone. Under Balalaika's command, the Moscow hotel was completely evacuated, but the Russian mafia, led by Vasily, was in big trouble. Unable to contact Balalaika, her subordinates suggested seeking instructions from the Moscow hotel first, but an angry Vasily pierced their palms with a knife. Because Balalaika was fanning the flames everywhere, the boss lost trust in her. Balalaika hated the lackeys of the Russian military, and she would never let people like Vasily off the hook. Several cars were parked outside the restaurant. The Washimin group opened fire wildly into the store. After a round of suppression, it was time for Ginji to make his entrance. Vasily's group was completely defenseless and slaughtered. Vasily was also killed because he couldn't provide any information due to not speaking Japanese. At the same time, Revy retrieved the gun Benny had mailed to her from the US military base. She returned to find Rock looking unwell. A taxi was reporting on the casualties of several foreigners. The chaos Balalaika had hoped for had finally begun. Rock wanted Revy to accompany him to check on Yukio, but Revy, in a jealous manner, told him to think carefully about their position. Since Yukio was part of the Washimin group, she would inevitably be drawn into this whirlpool. According to Balalaika's style, she would never let Yukio go. Rock argued that Yukio was different from them, but Revy insisted that Yukio had already stepped into the dark world, and Balalaika handling her in the gangster's way was perfectly fine. After saying this, Revy scratched her head again. Her duty was to protect Rock's safety, not interfere with his beliefs, so she would accompany Rock. Balalaika bribed the hotel staff to ensure they only took calls from the Russian embassy. They already knew about Vasily's death, and this was exactly what Balalaika wanted. The domain of violence would be executed by them. By this time, Yukio had returned home only to find Chaka already waiting there. They hadn't yet sensed anything wrong. Upon entering, they found the house surrounded by thugs. Yoshida thought these were Chaka's hired help, but to his surprise, Chaka shot Yoshida on the spot. It turned out Chaka, seeing no future in the Washimin group, had planned to kidnap Yukio and join either the Kosa Council or the Russian mafia. Yoshida grabbed Chaka's legs, urging Yukio to run, but Chaka shot him dead. Yukio couldn't escape the trap that had already been set. At this moment, Rock and Revy arrived at Yukio's house. As soon as they got out of the car, Revy cautiously drew her gun. Rock then noticed that there were scattered footprints all over the entrance. Without hesitation, Rock rushed into the house. However, the house was empty except for the dead Yoshida. If Balalaika had been the one to act, Yukio should have been killed here as well. Revy carefully examined the gunshot marks and found that they were not from a Russian mafia gun, but a large caliber revolver. Only one person would use such a flashy pistol. Ginji did not smell gunpowder on Revy. Rock quickly explained that they were not the ones who fired the shots. Ginji ignored whatever Rock was saying and prepared to leave, but Rock stopped him. From the footprints left at the scene, it was clear that the other side had arrived in large numbers. Ginji going alone would be too late, and they were definitely prepared to deal with him. So Rock suggested that they temporarily cooperate, which would be better than acting alone. Ginji agreed. Revy then stole a car and sped off under Ginji's navigation. Ginji asked Rock why he was helping him. Rock simply felt that Yukio did not belong here. She should live an ordinary life. Meanwhile, Chaka and some thugs were playing strip games at a bowling alley. Just as Yukio was about to be stripped naked, Rock and the others finally arrived. Revy told Rock to go to the back door and handle the situation as needed, while she and Ginji would attack from the front. Language barriers were not a problem. Once the fight started, the body would act on instinct. Seeing Yukio being treated this way, Ginji was furious. The two of them quickly killed all the thugs present. Seeing the situation turn against him, Chaka pushed his lackeys forward as shields and kidnapped Yukio to escape. However, he slipped on shampoo while going down the stairs and fell to the ground. Rock, who had been lying in wait, picked up a club and smashed it down hard on Chaka. The situation here was a complete mess. Revy suggested they split up to sweep the place and meet at the pool later. So Ginji left first, while Revy began slaughtering the remaining thugs.
Better start running, cause the boogeyman's coming to eat you up!
Chaka had not expected things to escalate this far, and his plans were in disarray. At this point, one of his subordinates suggested surrendering to save their lives, but Chaka shot him dead. Revy appeared behind Chaka, smoking a cigarette. Her opinion of this scum had sunk even lower. Even now, Chaka remained confident, picking up a can to challenge Revy to a gunfight. However, Revy kicked him so hard that his nose bled profusely. Such trash was not worth fighting. Revy decided to let Ginji deal with this traitor. Chaka chased Revy to the gymnasium. Ginji had been waiting there for a long time. The two exchanged insults. Just as Chaka pulled the trigger, Ginji swung his sword and split the bullet in half. Chaka didn't even have time to react. Ginji had already severed his hands and threw him into the swimming pool. Ginji held Chaka's head underwater, drowning him. Rock took Yukio to the locker room to hide. Yukio asked Rock why he came. Rock believed that they had dragged innocent Yukio into this. Yukio knew that Rock didn't understand anything. She wasn't dragged in. She was the one at the center. She had succeeded as the leader of the Washimin group. Rock was furious. This world was full of slaughter and betrayal. Yukio knew what this place was, and still stepped into it. Even so, Rock couldn't ignore Yukio, who had been dragged in. Yukio suddenly mentioned Bondo, believing that his death was essentially suicide. The organization had lost momentum and distanced itself from the top. As the direct descendant of the former leader, she was the only one who could prevent the gang's decline. No matter what, she had no other choice. This was the law of the underworld. Rock countered, asking about her life then. Everyone had tried their hardest to keep her away from the conflict, but she still chose to step into the darkness. Yukio recalled her life, thinking that if she had arrived earlier, things wouldn't have turned out this way. She had done her best for her father and those who followed him. Rock felt that Yukio was just forcing herself to take on the responsibility, but she had no choice but to do so. Rock could only say such things because he had always stood in the twilight. The lives and futures of others depended on her. She had no choice but to fight for them. Rock suddenly remembered what Revy had once told him. Rock finally realized that his feet were not standing anywhere. Yukio had made her decision. From now on, whether good or bad, she would bear it all. She asked Rock again why he was standing there. He joined the gang yet still wanted an ordinary life. But in the end, he made no choice at all, neither returning to a peaceful daily life, nor stepping into the darkness of evil. If Rock wanted to save her, he should have saved the Washimin group as well, but he couldn't do it. Because what Rock truly wanted to save was not her, but the ordinary life he was supposed to have let go of. If he had left Yukio to die, not even the last fragments of his memories of Japan would remain. He carried nothing, not even the things he should have discarded. Yet he still clung to a trace of longing. A man like him could save no one. Yukio also wanted to live an ordinary life, just as Rock didn't want to live in pain, but she was unwilling. That's why she hated Rock. Meanwhile, after killing Chaka, Revy was very interested in Ginji's technique of splitting bullets with a sword and wanted to fight him right then. But Ginji stopped Revy from drawing her gun. Revy and Rock had done him a favor, so he wouldn't attack them, but they would definitely have a chance to fight in the future. Yukio left with Ginji. She thanked Rock for coming to save her, but she never wanted to see him again, and Balalaika's surprise attack on the Washimin group was about to begin. Under Balalaika's command, the Washimin group's outposts were being wiped out one by one. Most of the high-ranking members had already been eliminated, leaving Yukio on the verge of becoming a leader with no followers. After being scolded by Yukio, Rock felt dejected. Revy, who had witnessed Ginji's ability to slash bullets with a sword, was exhilarated and eager to fight Ginji. Rock considered this suicidal behavior, but Revy argued they were already the walking dead. Their obsession with living blinded them with fear. But if they had no fear at all, she could take on the entire world. Rock insulted her by saying her interests were rotting in a stinky ditch, which left Revy feeling hurt. Meanwhile, Yukio met with Kosa Council President Masami. Despite being the direct descendant, Masami refused to acknowledge Yukio's succession. Not to mention bringing in those Russians, how would they take responsibility for the previous attacks on the Kosa Council? As the representative of the entire Washimin group, Yukio was no longer weak. It was the Kosa Council that had forced Bando's hand in the first place. Yukio was not there to apologize or solve problems. She had gathered evidence and planned to request mediation from the Kanto Peace Council. However, Yukio knew that escalating the matter to the Kanto Peace Council would be futile. The underworld had become a place ruled by desire, where morality no longer existed. The Washimin group's numbers had dwindled to 30% after the Moscow hotel attack. Defeating the Russian mafia seemed nearly impossible. Yukio instructed the surviving members to go into hiding, while she and Ginji returned to the office to review the surveillance tapes. Since the Moscow hotel attack on the Washimin group, cameras had been installed at every outpost. Although most were destroyed, some fragmented footage remained. Ginji noticed that the enemy's transport was a van with electrician labels. The next day, 2 robbers drove an electrician's van with guns into the bank. After stealing a large sum of money, they left. The robbers tore off the van's label and removed their hoods, revealing themselves to be Yukio and Ginji. Soon after the police were alerted, they began searching for the van with the electrician's label. Yukio had planned to use the police to investigate the Moscow hotel. She envied Rock's vast world outside. She had heard of a city full of villains and thought it wouldn't be bad to be a gangster there. But if they were going there, they would have to settle things with Balalaika. Soon, the police discovered the electrician's van at the Moscow hotel. Yukio quickly thought about how Balalaika had arrived and how so many weapons had been transported to Japan. She speculated that it was by ship. Balalaika naturally noticed Yukio's small countermeasures, but this only strengthened her resolve to eliminate Yukio. With Balalaika gone, the balance in Rowanapur collapsed, and chaos erupted on the island. The Triad tried to stop it, but with little success. This was the true nature of the island. Benny was glad Rock wasn't there, as he was the worst with guns. But Dutch was relieved Rock didn't have to use them, estimating that Rock's bullets might even bounce back. Balalaika and Rock met in the underground parking lot. It was Rock's turn to translate again, but this time, not for the Washimin group, but for the Kosa Council. Balalaika planned to cooperate with the Kosa Council. Rock was shocked. He remembered Yukio's questioning that night. For some unknown courage, he actually stood up to oppose Balalaika's cooperation with the Kosa Council. Revy was terrified. Now, the Washimin group's strength had greatly diminished, and it no longer posed a threat to the Moscow hotel. Balalaika told Rock not to mistake his position. He was just a translator and had no right to question her actions. But Rock continued to talk incessantly. Before he could finish his words, Balalaika had already thrown him onto the car. Revy instantly drew her gun. Balalaika made Rock look at her. The word justice was deeply loved by the public. If he did not use his own strength, he was dooming others to death. Balalaika was not scolding Rock. She just didn't expect such words to come out of his mouth. Revy panicked, shifting from being firm to begging Balalaika to return Rock. Balalaika advised Revy not to seek the same way of life as Rock. Just when Rock, the oblivious one, wouldn't shut up, Balalaika was undoubtedly going to win. Nothing would be lost. But she felt that wasn't enough. Balalaika stated there were 2 ways to successfully beg for mercy. One was to please the person holding his life, and the other was to provide an acceptable reason. Rock met neither condition. Balalaika wondered what favor Rock owed Yukio that he would risk his life to save her. At that moment, Rock smiled. It wasn't out of favor or some righteous pretext, but his own interest. Just as some enjoyed rotting in sewers, he had his own interest-driven heroism. They were essentially the same. After hearing this, Balalaika laughed loudly. Rock convinced her to spare him this time. Revy angrily grabbed Rock's collar to snap him to their senses. They were still standing here only by God's grace. Why provoke a warmonger like Balalaika? Her task was to protect Rock, but he shouldn't seek death either. Rock didn't explain. He just asked Revy to walk through the city with him again. Even without Balalaika's words, Revy realized she had unconsciously fallen into this peaceful life. Having survived in filthy environments, she no longer knew how to live elsewhere. Only Balalaika remained true to her original self. Revy told Rock to leave. His nightmare should end. But Rock said he had already died when he met Revy. The weight of everything here was an illusion to him. He hadn't come back to return but to forget and face reality. He had regretted it a year ago, but now he no longer did. The group of kids playing shooting games came to the park again. Seeing Revy, they excitedly surrounded her, eager to witness her marksmanship again. With Rock's permission, Revy pulled out her real gun. Several shots shattered the cans. The kids were terrified. Revy and Rock shared a smile before leaving the park. At the same time, Yukio obtained a Russian Stechkin pistol. Her plan was brilliant: to leave for Ronapur, gather her scattered followers, and conquer that city full of villains. But this idea was unlikely to succeed. For this reason, Ginji had to fight his way through the Russians and challenge Balalaika. Yukio knew Ginji's chances of survival were slim, but they had come so far together, so she hoped they could stay together no matter where they went. Rock followed Balalaika to the Kosa Council headquarters. The meeting ended, and Balalaika's work was done. The rest of the task would be handed over to others. The police surrounded the Kosa Council entrance. The chief was certain the three who had just entered were involved in gang conflicts, but their identities couldn't be traced, so Interpol's cooperation was requested. Rock's mood remained heavy. Balalaika saw he still had something on his mind. It turned out Rock wanted her to completely crush the Washimin group. Only then could Yukio be fully liberated, the only way to return her to normal life under the current circumstances. Balalaika praised Rock for making the right judgment, saying his villainous career had a bright future. But this was far from Yukio's thoughts. After a break, the meeting entered its final stage. Masami wanted to shake hands and make peace with Balalaika, but she looked at him strangely. Then Balalaika proposed checking their weapons to prevent future cooperation issues. Though wary, Masami had his men hand over their guns. He believed things had gone this far, so the other side wouldn't turn on them. But Balalaika proved otherwise. After tricking them into giving up their Acutech pistol, she immediately mocked them, saying they didn't deserve to cooperate with such inferior firearms. She then shot and killed Masami. The police outside heard the gunshots and tried to rush in, but they couldn't even open the door. After dealing with the Kosa Council, Balalaika offered the pistol to Rock. Rock politely declined, admitting that although he disliked guns, he would never forget the act of pulling the trigger. Just as they were about to leave, the police finally burst in, but Balalaika completely ignored them. She asked Rock to tell Yukio that the Moscow hotel would unilaterally cease hostilities from now on because they had gone underground. She also knew that Yukio was gathering gang members to head to Ronapur. Then she pushed past the police and left. She was in a diplomatic vehicle, so no one dared to stop her. Rock seized the opportunity to jump onto Revy's motorcycle. The two vehicles drove off in full view of everyone, completely disregarding the police. It wasn't until everyone had left that Interpol arrived late. It was then that the Japanese police realized the woman was not the Russian ambassador, but a notorious Russian gang leader. At the same time, Rock wanted to find Yukio to tell her the war was over, but Balalaika had caused such a commotion that the area would soon be locked down, making it impossible for them to leave. However, as the two sped toward the dock, a van crashed into the motorcycle. Yukio got out and fired warning shots at Rock, demanding he take them to the dock. She also blew up Revy's motorcycle. Just escaping danger, Rock was forced into the van. He asked Yukio what she was doing. Since the Moscow hotel had declared a ceasefire, it was all over. Yukio didn't believe Balalaika's words at all. As long as she and Ginji were with the Washimin group, it would never fall. She could no longer escape the darkness. That was reality. Rock reminded her that he had no value as a hostage in front of the Moscow hotel. But Yukio didn't care. She only wanted Rock to be a witness to this desperate gamble. And at that very moment, Revy hijacked a truck halfway and chased after them. The two vehicles collided but showed no signs of stopping, nearly crashing into the sea. Rock suddenly grabbed the steering wheel and brought the car to a halt. The long-awaited confrontation between Revy and Ginji had finally arrived. A battle of guns versus cold steel. The fight was evenly matched. People like them would ultimately meet the same fate, no matter where they went. Rock and Yukio silently watched the duel. Rock knew Yukio had once had a chance to avoid the same path as Balalaika, but she hadn't taken it. She wasn't standing there for the sake of the underworld's reputation. She was struggling to merge with the darkness. Standing in the twilight, Rock saw everything clearly. Yukio should have put down her sword and left with Ginji, but she didn't want to abandon her homeland so easily. She had rolled the dice, there was no turning back. Meanwhile, Ginji had knocked Revy to the ground. Just as he raised his sword to strike, he suddenly heard Yukio's words in his ear. In that moment of distraction, Revy, despite being stabbed in the leg, shot Ginji through the throat. The fight was over. Rock rushed over to help Revy pull out the knife. Yukio picked up Ginji's sword. Since the dream was over, the world on the other side was too far away. Then she pressed the blade against her own throat. Revy shouted at Rock not to look, warning it would leave scars, but Rock stared unblinking as Yukio drove the blade through her neck. Missing the ship, Rock and Revy returned to the island using Dutch's fake passport. Rock tucked Yukio's photo into his chest. A new mission awaited him. She was known by countless people as the strongest humanoid weapon maid, and also the most powerful assassin of the Revolutionary Army. Beneath her cute appearance lay grenades hidden under her skirt, and the ability to crush machetes with her teeth. Just when she grew weary of killing and prepared to become a maid to repay the person who saved her life, her master became entangled in political turmoil and died. For this reason, the one once called the Hound picked up her gun again and walked into vengeance, single-handedly taking on an entire trained U.S. military force alone. In 1969 Vietnam, a U.S. Army lieutenant clashed with a despicable teammate to protect a girl. The two then engaged in a duel. "26 years later, in Venezuela, the head of the Lovelace family, one of South America's 13 noble families, died in an explosion. The household was left with only the maid Roberta and the young master Garcia. As the fiercest hound of the Revolutionary Army, Roberta was taken in by the head of the Lovelace family, a friend of her father, when she was being pursued. She was disguised as a maid and hidden in the house. Out of gratitude to Diego, Roberta stayed in the estate as an ordinary maid to care for the family's only son, Garcia. Diego once put his arms around Garcia and Roberta's shoulders and proudly introduced the family weapons displayed in the hall. The Lovelace family motto, "Give alms to the living and flowers to the dead." Wield the sword for justice and impose sanctions on villains, but they will not join the ranks of saints. Roberta thought that rescuing Garcia from the Black Lagoon team was the last time she would hold a gun. It was not until Diego's death that the dormant hound bared her fangs again. This was the path she chose. Even if she would also suffer the torment of karmic flames, this was not the suffering the Lovelace family should endure. She would not use the noble name of revenge. This was merely the mutual slaughter of wild dogs. She would bring the iron hammer of justice to all injustice. The world political situation is turbulent. A group of spies infiltrated Roanapur, but they were shocked by the chaos of the city. At the airport, 7 people had their luggage stolen. Prostitutes were flirting with government officials in broad daylight. The stench of decay was spreading everywhere. At that moment, the colonel spotted a Japanese businessman who stood out on the street. A child bumped into him, but he didn't even react. The child then handed the stolen wallet to an old woman, but the old woman had it taken away from her the moment she opened it. Everyone in the city knew Revy and the Black Lagoon Guild she represented. The unfortunate victim of the wallet theft was Rock. Rock didn't care. He had more than enough to spare, so he might as well give it to the orphans. Revy saw things more clearly. Such charity would only turn those children into corpses. Rock always helped others recklessly, which would eventually harm himself and others. Revy returned the wallet to Rock, but Rock asked her if she believed 2 bullets wouldn't hit the same hole. Revy looked at him strangely. It wasn't about 1 or 2 bullets, but the skulls in the submarine, the twins from Romania, the daughter of the Tokyo Yakuza. For those things, Rock had already lost everything he had, and there were far too many people who treated this place as a graveyard. The police station called the Black Lagoon Guild, asking Dutch to keep an eye on some strange visitors. This wasn't the first time he had received such an unusual request. Someone had arrived on the island, putting the entire city on high alert. Revy got the news from the Moscow hotel. Someone had seen a maid coming ashore. It was Roberta, the Terminator maid who had caused havoc in the city to rescue the kidnapped young master. Dutch gathered the members at a bar. The unlucky owner nearly panicked when he heard the name Roberta. His bar had been ransacked 15 times since he opened it, with the worst incident being Roberta's rampage. He couldn't afford another one like that. The city was buzzing with activity. The triad had just left, and now the Colombian mafia had arrived. The headquarters had even brought in the military for this matter, as they were the ones who had kidnapped the maid's young master last time. Gustavo asked Revy for information about Roberta. Revy told him about Roberta's appearance and weapons: a shotgun disguised as an umbrella, a suitcase with a machine gun and grenades, firepower comparable to a small army. Just as Revy and Gustavo were deep in conversation, a person walked into the bar, making the owner's face turn pale. A girl in a maid's outfit introduced herself as Fabiola, a maid of the Lovelace family. She had come at the young master's request to invite the Black Lagoon Guild to the hotel for negotiations. A thug lifted Fabiola up. Was the girl's weight a bit off? Meanwhile, Benny had uncovered the trigger for this series of events. Last October, during a ceremony held by a new faction in Venezuela, a bomb attack occurred, killing the head of the Lovelace family. But Dutch couldn't see how this was connected to the city. In the bar, Gustavo threatened Fabiola to take them to her young master Garcia. Fabiola sighed. A knife sprang from her shoe sole, and she kicked a thug in the crotch. Watching this made a group of men clutch their groins. Several guns were pointed at her simultaneously. Gustavo ordered his men to search her, but Revy deliberately knocked over a wine bottle. Fabiola pulled out 2 Mag 7 shotguns from her sleeves and sprayed the area with bullets. The bar turned into a battlefield again. The owner cursed while hiding behind the counter. Gustavo seized the opportunity to call for reinforcements. On the way, Dutch saw several cars rushing toward the bar. Upon receiving the news that the maid was in the bar, the reinforcements opened fire with heavy machine guns, completely disregarding their teammates' lives. Revy laughed loudly while holding a glass. Fabiola somehow produced a grenade launcher and blew up 2 armored vehicles. She then threatened the surviving gang members to flee. Gustavo, who tried to resist, was also stopped by Revy. When Dutch and Benny arrived, the unlucky owner's bar was once again reduced to ruins. The actions of the Colombian mafia quickly reached Mr. Chang. The fact that uncontrollable people had infiltrated the city greatly displeased him. Fabiola boarded the Black Lagoon's car to head to the hotel. Revy teased Fabiola, asking if all the maids in her family were like Roberta. The Lovelace family appeared significantly wealthier than the last time they were seen, evidenced by their ability to employ 5 maids. Of course, only Fabiola was the combat maid personally protecting Garcia. They arrived at the hotel where Garcia was staying. Fabiola pushed open the door only to find Mr. Chang there. She grabbed her gun and lunged at him, but was easily subdued by Mr. Chang. Garcia stopped Fabiola. For now, it seemed Mr. Chang had only come to talk to him. Perhaps because of his father's death, Garcia appeared much more mature than the last time they met. After his father's death, the main members of the right-wing militia were arrested, and the attack was blamed on the right wing's dissatisfaction with the left-wing government. But it was precisely because it was too normal that it became suspicious. The right wing didn't have the technology to carry out the bombing, yet the police treated it as a closed case. After that, officers from the airborne unit, who belonged to the same new faction, visited the Lovelace family. By reviewing the access records of relevant personnel, they identified 6 suspicious individuals from the spy department. All 6 had resigned 2 months before the incident and were assigned as guards around the podium on the day of the bombing. Garcia then produced a photo taken 6 months before the attack, accidentally captured by the military police during a search in another case. The person in the photo was Marcos, the leader of the 6 suspects. The day after seeing the photo, Roberta left Venezuela. It turned out she had discovered Marcos's whereabouts and found him. Soon after, Marcos's body was found by the river. Next was the second person in the photo, Colonel Simon from the NSA. According to the intelligence Marcos provided before his death, the explosion was orchestrated by the NSA. She needed to find out where the other participants in the plan were, even if it meant going against the entire military. Later, Simon's body was discovered in a fire. After that, Roberta booked a ticket to Ronapur. Now, Garcia's purpose in coming to find Black Lagoon became clear. Dutch flatly refused him. Roberta was a bona fide madwoman, but Fabiola said they were not entrusting Black Lagoon but Rock. Garcia earnestly requested Rock to find Roberta. Even so, Dutch still flatly refused. Rock was part of Black Lagoon. He wouldn't risk his employees' lives. Roberta was undeniably insane. But precisely for that reason, Garcia had to find her even more. He also knew this was an unreasonable demand, so he had to steel himself and take action alone. Rock felt Garcia had truly changed, like an adult. After all, with neither his father nor Roberta around, he could only learn to be strong. It was then that Mr. Chang took over the task of finding Roberta. After all, Roberta would eventually cause trouble for the Americans. which would be bad news for both the city and him. Dutch said they didn't care about such matters. City security was Triad's responsibility, but Mr. Chang said Garcia's choice of Rock was a good one. After all, both he and Black Lagoon were neutral parties. Mr. Chang urged Rock to help Garcia. All he needed to do was catch up to Roberta before she met the army. Rock said he needed some time to think. Before leaving, Mr. Chang patted his shoulder. At this rate, Garcia would be completely gray-haired before turning 20. As Mr. Chang said this, Rock felt like someone was holding a gun to his head again. Dutch didn't oppose Rock taking the job. He had only one condition. If Roberta had already met the army, Rock had to back off. Ronapur was divided among many factions. During World War II, it was used as a military port by the Japanese army. After the war, it became a massive drug distribution hub. To this day, it remains a hell on earth. Helping Garcia in such a place meant Rock had to keep thinking. The South American mafia was the spark for this incident. Gustavo had once said he would send troops. The US military would also be pursuing Roberta. The common thread among these three parties was that they were all genuine soldiers. Rock called Dutch. What did Dutch mean when he said Balalaika owed him a favor? They talked late into the night. Another piece of Rock's puzzle fell into place, but he still felt something wasn't quite right. There were other forces operating in the city. On the other side, Revy went to find Eda to play cards and lost miserably. Eda asked where Rock was, so Revy brought up the matter of Roberta. When she heard US military, Eda's hand froze. Rock stayed up all night, sketching out the rough outline of the plan. In the hotel, Garcia anxiously awaited Rock's reply, but there was no news by dawn. Just as Fabiola was about to leave, Rock and Benny arrived. They then went to a bar reduced to ruins, where the second floor had also been destroyed. The unlucky owner was now taking a group of girls outside to entertain customers. From the owner, Rock learned that Roberta had visited his place the night before, inquiring about shops selling war supplies. While owner acted as a middleman making calls all around, Roberta was chewing stimulants like candy. The owner provided information on 3 shops. Before leaving, the owner asked Rock why he wasn't with Revy. It seemed everyone thought the two were a couple. Although they obtained intelligence, the subsequent negotiations did not go smoothly. All 3 shops turned them away. Fabiola angrily demanded to know from Rock what was going on. Benny sarcastically asked if that wasn't the inevitable outcome, as the shops in the city were suspicious of those searching for the mad maid. Fabiola wanted to search for clues herself, but was stopped by Garcia. Rock wondered why Fabiola wasn't afraid in such a place. Fabiola was born in the slums of Caracas, where she had seen too many thugs and scoundrels in her childhood. Rock asked where Fabiola had learned her shooting and kicking skills, only to be kicked by her. It turned out Garcia didn't know Fabiola had kicking skills. Fabiola's kicking was capoeira, which she had secretly learned at a dojo when she was young. Her birthplace wasn't a good place, so self-defense was necessary. She didn't want to kill people casually, which was why she chose this martial art. Garcia didn't blame Fabiola at all. Instead, he thought she was impressive. Benny agreed with Fabiola's philosophy but suggested that in such a place, it would be better to pull the trigger without hesitation. Garcia saw this as the devil's temptation and didn't want Fabiola to become bloodthirsty. Benny said nothing more and took them back to Mr. Chang's presidential suite, ending their work for the day. He couldn't just stand by and watch the child die, but there was only so much he could do. The church had known for a long time that Ida was a CIA agent. The power struggle between the NSA and CIA has never ceased. The NSA did not inform the CIA about the bombing in Venezuela. The CIA's main task is to expand its power by operating in secrecy, taking advantage of the shift in focus to economic intelligence warfare. The NSA's current actions are undoubtedly hindering them. The most important thing now is to gather intelligence. Yolanda had no objections to her actions. After all, the CIA had paid for Ida's infiltration. On their way back after dropping off Garcia, Rock and Benny happened upon a mafia car. It seemed the gangs in the city had also started moving, just as Rock had predicted the night before. They were going to hold a coordination meeting to discuss how to handle Roberta, but Rock was certain no decision would be made. Mr. Chang would explain the issues related to the maid and her target, but those who didn't understand the seriousness of the matter would disrupt the meeting, like the Italian mafioso who treated it as a joke. At that point, Mr. Chang would clarify that Roberta's target was active-duty soldier. which would alert Balalaika because her troops were soldiers trained for World War I-II. The Colombian mafia reacted entirely differently. To maintain good relations with the Revolutionary Army, they proactively offered to deal with Roberta. But Balalaika knew their enemy wasn't the maid but the maid's enemy. Those Americans were clearly waging a drug eradication war. This port had been a city of sin for 35 years. If they tolerated interference from those living in the light, no one would be left standing here. Yet even with this sense of crisis, they couldn't locate Roberta immediately. The same problem deeply troubled Rock. In a basement, Roberta was kneeling on the ground, praying devoutly. The bleeding man told her to stop overdosing on medication. Does she really not intend to return to Garcia's side? Is what she's doing really revenge? No matter how much she atones, it can never make up for the sins of her past. She is only thinking of self-destruction. Roberta pulled out a gun to silence him. The man who brought her clothes was startled and asked who she had been talking to. There was no one else in the room besides herself. Rock found Revy and asked for her help. Revy knew Rock was planning to do the same thing he had done to save Yukio in Japan. Despite Balalaika's threats, he still insisted on his own stance. But this was all just his dangerous personal interest. He hadn't considered what position Revy, who followed him, would be in. Revy wanted to know what name she would accompany him on this foolish mission under. She no longer wanted to go with the flow. Revy had once compared herself to a gun, while Rock was the bullet. A bullet without a gun was nothing more than a pile of lead. If he hadn't come to this city, he would have lived his entire life as ordinary lead. But he came here and became a bullet, and only Revy could ignite him. Revy understood Rock just as well. Rock's bullet was a silver bullet that could even destroy monsters, but if used at the wrong time, it would be devoured by the monster. Revy got dressed and tossed a bullet to Rock. In the end, she was swayed by Rock. The two then took Fabiola to an arms shop to inquire. With Revy's involvement, the shop immediately opened its doors to them. It turned out Roberta had been here, but not to buy a gun. She had come to repair an 18th century Spanish flintlock, the very one hanging on the wall of the Garcia house. Later, they went to find an explosives expert, but it wasn't Roberta who came to see him. It was an informant. At the same time, in the church's confessional, Mr. Chang received contact from CIA agent Ida. The invading force was the Special Operations Unit Gray Fox, under the command of the NSA. Their primary mission was to capture the largest warlord in the Golden Triangle, Xi'an, and deliver him to the Supreme Tribunal. The main raw materials for Triad's drug factories all came from Xi'an. The 18-member Special Forces unit would disguise themselves as tourists on Joy Street, lie low in the town's hotels, and await the attack order. Ida informed Mr. Chang of the specific hiding locations of the personnel and demanded to know their countermeasures. Mr. Chang looked down on the CIA bastards, thinking they were nothing more than the government's lackeys. Ida stated they were not lackeys, but a giant serpent with countless heads, possessing the ability to bring a nation to ruin. They were the only and strongest existence in the world. After Rock convinced Revy, their investigation finally made progress. From the informant, Revy learned the location of Roberta's hideout. During World War II, the Japanese army dug a tunnel here for a protracted war, and Roberta was hiding there. Rock, along with Garcia and Fabiola, headed toward the tunnel. Meanwhile, Gray Fox, lurking in the city, noticed something unusual. Their phones were tapped, the roads were blocked, and there were surveillance personnel everywhere. Many military personnel had also arrived. A major battle awaited them. Revy knew that charging in blindly would be suicide, so she called Shenhua midway. At the same time, the Colombian gang was approaching Gray Fox's hiding spot. They were about to throw grenades when sudden gunfire erupted from behind the door. The person inside then detonated a claymore mine, destroying the entire second floor. The gang members downstairs sensed something was wrong and rushed upstairs, only to find their comrades all dead. Meanwhile, after the colonel led his team onto the rooftop, he spotted a figure on the opposite building and immediately threw a smoke grenade to obscure vision. But Roberta, armed with a Barrett, opened fire. By the time Rock arrived, it was too late. The intense battle had already begun. Garcia still refused to give up on Roberta, but Rock could no longer accompany her. Dutch had warned him that once Roberta engaged the US military, he had to back off. Before leaving, Rock gave Garcia an envelope, telling him to open it only in desperation. Revy told Fabiola that when shooting, one must aim for a kill. One day, she would become an excellent marksman. Fabiola said she would not follow in Revy's footsteps. On the rooftop, Gray Fox was forced to evacuate urgently under Roberta's suppression. At the same time, the Revolutionary Army arrived on the rooftop. But Roberta didn't even dodge, firing her gun and turning her opponents into blood mist. Immediately after, a pole-vaulting figure disappeared from the rooftop. The commander of another army could see that this hunting dog was relentlessly pursuing Gray Fox. Revy and Shenhua stormed into the building where Roberta was located, wiping out the revolutionary squad. However, they forgot to leave a live person to interrogate for intelligence. After searching around, they found one who was barely alive. Revy had Fabiola translate for her, promising to take him to the doctor if he revealed Roberta's location. As soon as the soldier disclosed Roberta's whereabouts, Revy shot him dead. Fabiola couldn't believe Revy was so cruel. In anger, she aimed her gun at Revy. Revy's actions were nothing but wanton killing. The next second, Shenhua's knife was pressed against her neck. If they were going to preach morality now, they might as well retreat. Garcia stopped Fabiola and urged them to move forward. This was a filthy place where everyone was a scoundrel. But that was exactly why they needed such professional troublemakers. That was why he hoped even more that Fabiola would act according to her own beliefs. Gray Fox has now run out of options. It's impossible to shake off the hunting dogs. Rock has set up the chessboard for the U.S. military's withdrawal, while he also awaits the appearance of a key force. Mr. Chang called Rock, urging him to stop. It was precisely because Rock wanted to make the checkmate move in the chess game that Mr. Chang followed suit and placed his bet. But at this point, Rock owes nothing to anyone. What he hates most in the world is hypocrisy. Mr. Chang has completely treated Garcia and the maid as pawns. Rock angrily called Mr. Chang a bastard, only to hear him burst into laughter. Rock's anger stems first from his unwillingness to accept this unwinnable game, and second, because his deepest insecurities were touched. Compared to Rock, Mr. Chang understands people better. This gang leader, deeply entrenched in darkness, was once a Hong Kong police officer who sought to uphold the law. Mr. Chang urged Rock to end the fight quickly, but Rock refused to give up. He would absolutely not let this matter end here. Under Roberta's pursuit, the Revolutionary Army collided with the Colombian gang. The two sides engaged in a firefight, blocking the path of Revy and her group behind them. This time, Shenhua brought along Frederica and Lawton. The continuous gunfire made it impossible to distinguish between the warring sides. The colonel ordered a feint squad to stay behind, then launch a coordinated attack once Roberta appeared. The Colombian gang attempted to ambush the Revolutionary Army from behind, but were trapped by Revy and Shenhua. Taking advantage of the situation, Fabiola rushed toward Roberta with Garcia, only to run into another group of revolutionaries. Fabiola told Garcia to go ahead while she covered the retreat. At that moment, Lawton appeared, drawing the revolutionaries' attention. Frederica cut the Revolutionary Army in half. Amid intense gunfire, Fabiola was forced to separate from Garcia. He hid in a building, hearing footsteps approaching. Frightened, he crouched in a corner, just missing Roberta as she passed by. Using the reflection in a mirror, Roberta observed the Revolutionary Army surrounding her below. Garcia, who had found stimulants on the ground, also sensed Roberta's arrival. He climbed over the corpses to the third floor, only to encounter a standoff between the revolutionary leader and Roberta. He had to hide again. However, Roberta was completely no match for the leader. The leader belonged to Cuba's Special Operations Forces and knew Roberta's moves inside out. The higher-ups wanted Roberta's head, but he didn't. Instead, he wanted to bring Roberta back to the Revolutionary Army. Garcia picked up an iron rod, ready to rescue the maid. But to his surprise, Roberta actually agreed with the leader's proposal. That place was indeed boring, with no bloodshed or gunfire. The master's death was her chance to escape. Her only target was the head of the NSA, and she would go back with him once the job was done. Her thighs wrapped around the leader's waist, and he relished the thrill of conquering a hunting dog. Garcia bit his fingers hard to keep from crying out. The leader pointed a gun at Roberta, ordering her to undress, but to his shock, Roberta's belt buckle fired bullet that hit him. When the leader tried to grab his gun, Roberta stopped him. She had long seen through the Revolutionary Army's true nature and would never return. The only person in this world who could put a collar on her was her master Garcia, the only existence she would risk her life to protect. Roberta slammed into the leader's head, and just then Garcia appeared. To have Garcia see her like this made Roberta break down on the spot, while Garcia fainted from sheer terror. At the same time, the specter reappeared behind her. Roberta had always carried numerous small wounds, hidden beneath the veneer of a peaceful life. If she had chosen to stay with Garcia, the wounds would have healed, but she had wasted that chance with her own hands. If she couldn't earn forgiveness, how could she possibly live with Garcia in the future? Roberta's mind was no longer sound. She believed the current Garcia was a phantom conjured by the specter. The real master must still be waiting for her triumphant return at the manor. Roberta pulled out her gun and aimed it at Garcia. The NSA radio reported that they had located the target and had protected a boy during the chaos. How terrifying can a person be? She can shatter a machete with her teeth, even stop a chainsaw with her bare hands, directly terrifying two famous killers. Roberta easily defeated the reinforcements brought by Revy. Even knowing that Roberta had lost her mind, Fabiola still mustered the courage to run out and stop her. Yet Roberta passed by Fabiola with a gentle smile. Fabiola covered her mouth and cried. She knew the head maid had gone mad. Garcia woke up to find himself taken away by Gray Fox, who clearly didn't know he was the young master of the Lovelace family, only thinking he was a child caught in the crossfire. The colonel promised to take him to a safe place. Although the US military treated him very kindly, the thought that they were the murderers of his father made Garcia's hatred surge. He moved toward the gun held by the corpse. Garcia's situation was also part of Rock's plan. Although the goal was for Garcia to bring back Roberta, whether he could recognize Garcia after overdosing was still a question. If Garcia failed, his nature would undergo a decisive change. Now, Garcia was under the protection of the US military, and the next step was crucial. These 2 days he had been running around for Roberta's sake, and the news had already spread throughout the city. He knew that those who had been secretly observing this city would definitely contact him. Garcia trembled as he aimed his pistol at the colonel. Soldiers rushed over and tackled Garcia to the ground. The colonel ordered his men to release Garcia. They couldn't point guns at children. Garcia berated the colonel for turning his life upside down. At that political rally in Venezuela last October, 10 people were killed. One of them, his father. They had taken his father's life, and another important family member would never return. The colonel handed his loaded pistol to Garcia. He had the right to seek revenge. Garcia recalled his father, who once showed him a painting and asked him to find 4 hidden objects in it. He couldn't spot a single one, but his father simply turned the painting around and easily identified the differences. To see things correctly, one must examine them from multiple angles. Garcia took the gun from the colonel's hand. Ida rode her motorcycle to find Rock, telling him the order placed that morning had been delivered to the designated location. On her way, she encountered the military from the Moscow hotel. Gray Fox was in a tense standoff over Garcia when suddenly, an unknown radio channel interrupted. Balalaika appeared on the roof, warning the colonel that Roberta was right above them. She then fired a shot, forcing Roberta out from behind the window. Roberta leapt down from the building, tackling the colonel to the ground. Soldiers shielded Garcia from danger and fired to push Roberta back. Garcia told the US troops not to harm her. Roberta was another life they had ruined. Roberta recognized Garcia, but she was still far from normal. Under the Moscow hotel's heavy fire, she had no choice but to retreat temporarily, and Balalaika's intervention was also part of Rock's plan. Balalaika values Mr. Chang as an opponent more than fighting the US military. Triad and the Moscow hotel are rivals vying for dominance in this city, but no victor has emerged yet. In the final battle before the truce, Mr. Chang hit Balalaika, causing her to fall into the sea, and it was Dutch who saved her. Because he gave her the chance to seek revenge against Mr. Chang, Balalaika has always felt deeply indebted to Dutch. To expel the unstable factors from the city and settle the score with Mr. Chang, Balalaika joined the melee. As a result, Gray Fox's operational intentions have changed significantly. Even if they continue the mission, they will need means to accomplish it, and Rock offered to provide that. Once the mission is terminated, it will affect the government's reputation, so those people will complete the task even at the cost of their lives. With that, all of Rock's cards except Roberta are in play, and the goods ordered from the church come into effect. Whether the US military or Garcia pays, the church made profit. Rock stopped Ida and asked if her earnings were only this much. The actual ruler of this city is Triad, but Mr. Chang still acts restrained. He has been waiting for someone to provoke Mr. Chang into action. the real boss controlling the entire city from behind. Ida told Rock to stop talking and not to peer into the abyss out of curiosity. Under the cover of the Moscow hotel, the remaining members of Grey Fox are evacuating. The colonel doesn't want to pursue who these people are. He just wants to leave this crazy city as soon as possible. Garcia opens the envelope. Rock told him to read only when he has no other options. It says that if he fails to catch up with Roberta, he should lead the army to the location marked on the map. There, he will prepare transportation. Rock calls Dutch, who is still furious. Although he went against Dutch's orders by interfering in the Roberta matter, this call isn't just an apology. He hopes Dutch will accept a job assignment from the US government. This is legitimate work for the Black Lagoon Guild. They'll send out the troublemaker causing chaos in this city, and another troublesome person will leave with them. Only they can enjoy the fun of bringing this disturbance to a close. Dutch is stunned. He thinks Rock is out of his mind and needs to see a doctor. He was about to say he absolutely wouldn't take this job when Mr. Chang called. Revy and Shenhua were secretly following Grey Fox when gunshots suddenly rang out from upstairs. Both Shenhua and Revy were wounded. Balalaika warned them not to interfere in this war. Fabiola ran to meet up with the young master, while Garcia showed the Colonel Rock's letter. Sure enough, there was a car parked at the designated location for evacuation. After everyone assembled, the Colonel immediately ordered a retreat. Garcia and Fabiola were taken away with them. Despite the chaos, the police never showed up. Outside, the streets remained as bustling as usual. The Colonel thanked Balalaika for her support. In truth, Balalaika's true enemy had always been the US military. It was the battle they had longed for when they were still soldiers. But now they had been reduced to fighting for power with thugs. Still, she asked the Colonel to remember that they maintained their discipline and spirit. Just then, Roberta pursued them again. Balalaika ordered the salute prepared for the Colonel to be fired. A terrifying barrage of firepower rained down on Roberta. The Colonel praised Balalaika's tactics as outstanding, but she couldn't understand why an army with such strength still fell far behind the US military. She had once saved children in a refugee camp during an illegal cross-border operation, which led to her being discharged from the military. Balalaika told the Colonel to leave the city as soon as possible and never be seen by them again. Rock picked up the injured Revy. Everything in this city had collapsed, including his mind. Rock no longer knew what he was doing. He brought Revy to the dock where the US military was already waiting. Dutch ultimately accepted this job and left this insane city with a boat full of people. Rock had prepared everything perfectly from the start, and with Mr. Chang's offer, Dutch couldn't refuse. He found the US military in the cabin. Although he was reluctant to take this job, the payment had been received. He would fulfill his promise until the contract expired, and he didn't think Roberta would die so easily. Benny told the Colonel not to worry. Dutch knew these waterways well, having served in an inland river fleet during the Vietnam War. This group planned to transport them to the Golden Triangle via the Mekong River. At the same time, Roberta boarded a flight to Bangkok, with Ida sitting next to her. She would deliver Roberta to the US military's destination for their final showdown. The torpedo boat stopped on the Mekong River for the night. Fabiola was memorizing English words, while Garcia muttered at the stern that Roberta was still alive. Revy believed this too, because Rock had a follow-up plan. But she was injured and couldn't help, so Fabiola would have to fight when the time came. Fabiola finds Rock too dangerous. Garcia has already suffered significant harm because of him. But Rock is the kind of person who loves to create surprises. Fabiola wonders why Revy doesn't stop him, or is she afraid Rock doesn't possess what she desires? Revy doesn't want to confront Rock's true thoughts because she knows he will cease to shine. If Revy truly loved the peaceful and relaxed Rock, they would have long escaped to live a stable life. Revy believes Fabiola is just like her, while Rock is the complete opposite. But none of this matters to Fabiola. They are only using Rock to bring back Roberta. Fabiola can see Revy's family is miserable, but her own family, though not perfect, has love. After hearing this, Revy laughs, calling Fabiola trash from the slums who dares to dream of becoming like Garcia. Fabiola is tired of arguing with Revy, but Revy won't let it go. Fabiola says Revy is the one who sees Rock as her salvation. Meanwhile, Rock approaches Garcia. A good show is about to begin. Rock is now a complete madman. Garcia is afraid of such Rock. Rock has something to entrust to him. At the same time, Revy's gun is pressed against Fabiola's head. What's needed to speak until the end is decisive power. Fabiola says Revy's smile is the grin of a skull on Halloween. Hearing this, Revy puts away her gun and laughs loudly. She came from the land of the dead with a gun in her arms. Not just her, everyone present is the same. The conversation on both sides ends simultaneously. A refueling ship arrives at night to refuel the torpedo boat. Garcia suddenly jumps off the boat without a word. He's tired of being manipulated by these people. Of course, he's not going to kill himself, he just wants to clear his head. Fabiola, frightened, hurriedly tries to pull Garcia back up, only to be pulled down by Garcia instead. He will no longer be lost. Fabiola must have seen Roberta's crazed state. She doesn't even remember who or what she's avenging. Garcia knows what she truly wants is to atone for her crimes. Garcia swears he will rescue Roberta no matter what. No matter what Rock persuades him to do, he will do anything to achieve his goal. He tells Fabiola to return to Venezuela first. Even alone, he will rescue Roberta. Fabiola suddenly unties her hair, saying this is beyond the master-servant relationship. Fabiola has always treated Garcia as a spoiled young master. She thought Garcia would give up after seeing such a terrifying Roberta, but he didn't. He can't let Roberta be left to rot in the wild. So Fabiola firmly takes Garcia's hand and decides to go find Roberta together. Revy is broken by Fabiola's words. What crap about family love? She grew up in a place where no one protected her. Recalling what happened in her childhood makes her feel nauseous. The torpedo boat entered the Mekong Delta within the scheduled time. Garcia went to see the colonel alone and returned his gun. He would not forgive the colonel's actions, but for now, they needed to reach a consensus. The colonel gathered his teammates and told them they would encounter Roberta's attack again after disembarking. They had to fight with all their might for the mission. Fabiola ran to question Rock about what he had made Garcia do. Rock revealed some details to her. Fabiola was furious that Rock had made Garcia do such things. Could nothing be done to solve the problem? Soon, the torpedo boat arrived at the Golden Triangle. The Gray Fox unit's sea journey ended here. The group left the riverbank in a speedboat. Rock laughed triumphantly. This time, he had won the bet. Mr. Chang had lost. The Gray Fox split into teams and infiltrated the forest, moving cautiously toward the designated location. Just then, one team noticed something unusual. The river in front of the village was filled with rod-like objects. At the same time, the other teams also discovered the same situation. Garcia realized Roberta was already there. Soon, the group arrived near the village, but there were no signs of human activity in the village, and they found several bodies. It turned out Roberta had taken over the entire base. Only the Gray Fox and the hunting dogs remained. Roberta also noticed the army's arrival. She cut off one of the captive's ears and then hid the captive in the jungle, taking out 2 soldiers under the cover of night. The colonel ordered everyone to remove their night vision devices and prepare for close combat. A squad discovered a captive tied to a bomb in the forest. A code was required to disarm the device. The colonel realized this might be a trap and immediately ordered the squad to withdraw from the captive, but it was too late. Steel needles instantly pierced a soldier's chest. She had planted tubes everywhere, a silent declaration that not a single enemy would make it back. The squad in the jungle was like a fish in a barrel, completely unaware of which direction Roberta would attack from. Roberta crawled through the flower field and launched a surprise attack. The bomb's ambush around her exploded. During her escape, the colonel hit her in the leg. Logically, Roberta should have been immobilized, but she didn't stop because of the wound. Garcia knew this was useless. The wound would only enrage her further. Roberta's hands and legs were shot, but she seemed to feel nothing. She went on a rampage in the forest like a madwoman, but was soon left battered and unable to move. Then Garcia's voice came over the intercom, telling her she had to go somewhere. He would be waiting for her there. Disturbed by Fabiola, Revy tosses and turns in the cabin. Meanwhile, Rock remains at the bow, waiting for the battle to unfold. Everything is now dancing to his tune, including the fate of everyone in Roanapur. Revy points her gun at Rock, telling him to leave after finishing this. Yet all Rock sees is the excitement of the impending showdown. By morning, the patrol will arrive, and everything will be exposed. But before that, the outcome will be decided. Revy questions Rock if he knows what position he stands in, pushing himself into a dead end. Rock says he sees the path ahead. He defied Mr. Chang's wishes, and yet the latter did nothing, even allowing him to leave with Garcia. They also didn't kill Roberta because Mr. Chang doesn't just want to hide Roanapur, he wants to use Roberta to blunt the US military's edge. This is the origin of drugs, with Roanapur as the transit point. By pitting Roberta against the US military, Mr. Chang can cut off any chance of US judicial intervention in the Golden Triangle. But Rock won't let this happen. This is his revenge on Roanapur. He couldn't help those who were destroyed by this place before, but now he will end all misfortune tied to Roanapur. He doesn't care what he becomes. He can't return to his peaceful hometown anyway. Revy asks Rock why he left the twilight for the darkness. Rock knows the battle can only be settled here. Finally, he understands what kind of mindset Revy lives with every day. Without another word, Revy kicks Rock. At the same time, Garcia rushed to meet up with Roberta. He was afraid of what was about to happen. Fabiola didn't know what Rock had told him, but she still hugged Garcia tightly to give him strength. Roberta came to meet Garcia as promised. She no longer knew whether Garcia was really there or just her hallucination. The dead had been talking to her constantly. She wasn't even sure if she was alive or dead. But none of that mattered. As long as she completed her revenge, she would go back. Garcia told Roberta that revenge was no longer important. Roberta couldn't understand why Garcia had given up so easily. After all, it was they who had taken everything away. But Garcia said she wasn't the one to end the crime. He shot the colonel. That was how it would end. Roberta couldn't believe it was the young master who could do such a thing. Garcia had been thinking about what to say to Roberta when he saw her, but words were too inadequate. Garcia aimed his gun at Roberta. He was betting everything here. Let this gamble and revenge all end now. The moment Garcia fired, Roberta instinctively fought back. Roberta explained she hadn't meant to counterattack. Her hands just wouldn't listen. Strangely, despite the shots fired, Roberta remained unharmed. Garcia walked over and kissed Roberta, saying that was the end of it. But just then, the colonel, who had been shot by Garcia, stood up again. Roberta tried to grab her gun, but Garcia stopped her. The colonel and they had all died once. All the sins had already dissipated. He would carry the burden Roberta had to bear. From now on, he would support Roberta, and they would rely on each other for survival. Rock lay on the deck, lost in thought. After dawn, the US military returned to the ship. Everything turned out for the best. Rock finally wore a genuine smile. But then Fabiola suddenly shot Rock. They survived only by luck. It turned out the gun Rock gave Garcia was loaded with blanks. Rock had no regrets. Even so, he won the only thing that mattered. Several months later, Mr. Chang's belated retaliation finally arrived. Roanapur had not changed at all. Viewing the town with living eyes was painful, but it was the path he chose himself. And Rock knew he would also be dragged into the abyss.